our meeting. Welcome to the Portsmouth School Board meeting for January 28th, 2025. This is the night where we're going to discuss and vote on our redistricting plan. So before we get to that, Patty, can you give us the roll call?
Liz Barrett.
Here.
Tish Campbell.
Here.
Nancy Clay. Pip Blues.
Here.
Brian French.
Here.
Lee Hudson. Byron Matto.
Here.
Carrie Nolte.
Here.
Lisa Rappaport.
Here.
Eric Moore.
Here.
Nathan Delaney.
Here.
Okay, can we stand for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we begin, our superintendent would like to make an announcement.
We've informed the community before, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we had a death in our school community in the last day. I announced it to staff and family yesterday that we lost a member of our student body. And our condolences go out to the family and the friends of fourth grader Nora Bourbon from New Franklin School. And I also just wanted to thank the staff at New Franklin. We had to pull people together early Monday morning, and they weren't sure what they were walking into. And a lot of staff members have had direct, meaningful contact with Nora over the years. And it was a tough moment for everybody, and they had to rally to do what we needed to do on behalf of kids. But people did a tremendous job, and Joanne was awesome in everything that she did and how she went about thinking about the situation and then supporting her staff. So again, my condolences to all the people connected to Nora. We'll continue to be doing work to support both the adults and the kids in the building, and then across the district. So.
Thank you, Zach. We'll remember them in our prayers, certainly. Thank you, Joanne, for all your hard work on that. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to public comment. If you would like to speak, please come up to the microphone. You can come right here, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes to talk. Would anybody like to come up?
I just need to say that Nora was our neighbor. So it's been a really hard couple days. And it makes all this feel really insignificant, but.
Oh, we're sorry.
Thank you. I wasn't even sure if I was gonna make it tonight. Nobody else from the neighborhood came, so I felt like somebody had to.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay, Joni McNeil, 67 Crescent Way, Atlantic Heights. As you know, Atlantic Heights is no longer a part of the plan that is being put to vote today. But the fact that there isn't a list of each neighborhood broken down by street is still very concerning to me. As you know, the families in Atlantic Heights were late to the game because we weren't notified. Atlantic Heights is a very defined neighborhood, so once we found out, there was no question who would be affected. I am sure there potentially are families who still don't even know they are a part of this plan. At the redistricting committee meeting last week, the principals said their numbers weren't matching what was being projected because they weren't even sure which streets were included. The map on the redistricting site is just a screenshot and is very hard to read with lots of color coding that doesn't mean anything to someone who hasn't been following along. You could have put together the best laid plan, but it won't work if the families affected weren't notified in the process because they simply didn't know. One other thing I'd like to emphasize is the importance of defining a plan for monitoring this going forward. I know Atlantic Heights will be on the watch list, but we need to know specifically what that means. Will we be at these meetings every year living in limbo, or will it take years to really see the effects of the current plan? Maybe a survey could be sent to the neighborhoods being monitored to see where everyone stands every year in terms of the number of families and incoming siblings. It is important we know exactly what the plan is going forward. My last point, I'll end on a positive note. is how much I appreciate Byron and Carrie listening to our feedback and making changes to the plan involving Atlantic Heights and Meadowbrook on such short notice. It's obvious you two have put a ton of work into this process, and I hope it works out for the best, whatever that looks like. And huge shout out to Pip for going to the last redistricting committee meeting last week to become better informed about the plan. I would encourage the rest of you to vote for this, not just because you think it's the best possible solution, if that's the case, and definitely not just because you want this process to be over with, but only if you truly think all the affected families have been adequately informed and involved in the process all along. There's certainly no one size fits all solution, but we all deserve to have our voices heard so we can make the best decision for our families.
Thank you, Joanne. Do we have anyone else that would like to speak?
Hi, I'm Caroline Turk and I'm on Hillside Drive. Just to start off with, again, I've spoken a few times, but just to thank Byron and Kerry, because I really feel that you guys have gone above and beyond with the scope of numbers, the survey and all the information that you've gathered. I feel like that's more than we could have asked for. I am really pleased that parents' wishes were taken into account. I appreciate that you can't make everybody happy, but I do appreciate you making an effort to look at the majority of people. And, you know, my number one thing was family choice. And I feel like some families will want to move, and that's given them the opportunity. And equally, you've given the opportunities for families who it's not best for their family to not move. So I really do appreciate that. I think the only concern for me moving forward is obviously over the last several months, this has had an impact on the people's families who are involved. And moving forward, obviously we're getting given a choice now, but my concern is the board changes and then next time we don't have a choice. And I should have moved my kids now if in 2 years' time, because my youngest is in kindergarten, if in 2 years' time, then it's like, oh, actually we didn't move enough people, you guys have to go now. So that's my only consideration, which obviously nobody has a crystal ball moving forward, but that's just something to consider. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Caroline. Would anyone else like to speak?
Hey everyone, I'm Trisha Anderson, 328 Aldrich Road. I'm in Lafayette Park and I have kids in 5th grade, 3rd grade, kindergarten at Dondero. I have a lot of messy feelings about redistricting that won't fit very nicely into a smart narrative or into the allocated 3-minute limit. So forgive me, I'm just going to share some feelings. And first of all, I'm really grateful for the committee for hearing family feedback about school choice. I'm also really grateful for the work and time of the committee members. This is hard, unpopular, thankless work. So thank you. I am anxious about how I will tell my 5-year-old that many of her close neighborhood friends will go to a new school next year and she will not. How do I explain to my 5-year-old that our family has made a decision for her based largely on what's best for her older brother because I am unwilling to separate them? I'm a little frustrated by a process that has, at times, not prioritized good communication with families and has sometimes had severely limited timelines for community decision-making. I'm concerned that there have been very few conversations about student demographics and equity in this work. There were pre-existing social economic differences between our schools, and these proposed neighborhood changes exacerbate these differences rather than improve them. Finally, I am sad but resigned. I think redistricting is necessary at some point, although I'm not entirely convinced it's necessary for this year. I'm worried that if it does not pass now, a more sudden or drastic plan, perhaps with no choice or grandfathering, will be needed in the future. As some of my neighbors have pointed out, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. Thanks for listening to some of my thoughts. There are a lot of feelings here, some of which I recognize are contradictory, and I know this isn't an easy decision for anybody. If you choose to approve this plan, I hope you'll listen to the advice of some of the principals and will prioritize revisiting this topic moving forward in an ongoing, reoccurring, pre-scheduled way. Portsmouth's population is changing quickly. I hope the school board will not wait another 15 years or so to revisit this important topic or review topics around equity across all of our schools. A concrete, actionable plan for revisiting student numbers, facilities, and demographics every few years is needed to ensure equitable classroom sizes, ensure a mix of student backgrounds, and ensure equitable learning environments across all schools for the benefit of Portsmouth students. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. Would anyone else like to speak?
Julie Gallet, 10 Fletcher Street. I guess that's something when I left the meeting last time that I've been thinking about a little bit is, and I'm wondering if this can be addressed tonight, and I probably should have sent an email, but wondering, I know that you said that the NASDAQ numbers changed and you dropped 2 neighborhoods from December until now. And I guess my question is how do we know in a year from now that the NASDAQ projections won't be something kind of similar and we won't need to move all of these students? Because it sounded like we were going to be moving an extra 20 students and all of a sudden now we don't have to. So I just would like to hear a little bit more clarity around that. I'm also just asking all the members of the board that when you do vote tonight, you do understand what you are voting for and that you understand the precedence that's being set in this community for equity. And then something else that I just do want to bring up is Rule 14 of the school board. And I'm just kind of questioning whether or not members of the board who do have elementary students, if it is a conflict of interest or not for them to be voting, especially if you're directly impacted by this decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Anyone else?
Hi, Kim James, 1600 Islington Street. As we sit here tonight preparing for a vote, I would like to acknowledge how far Carrie and Byron have brought us in this process. We've learned so much about the elementary schools, and I believe there is a solution that best fits the needs of the families in this city, allowing current students to finish in their elementary schools and grandfathering their younger siblings through ensures families are kept together and student education isn't disrupted. Tonight, I feel confident that this portion of the redistricting discussion has reached a worthy proposal to vote on and pass. However, I have some major concerns for the cultural health of our schools moving forward. All 3 principals have voiced their concern regarding socioeconomic equity across the schools. They shared that this plan does not address the need for socioeconomic and cultural equity across the schools. It was also shared that by adding the proposed neighborhoods to Little Harbor, students who are in the minority will possibly feel more marginalized as the percentage of socioeconomic and cultural diversity shrinks. I'd like to read a quote from Dr. Cardona's report on the state of school diversity in the United States from May 2023. Dr. Cardona served as the Secretary of Education from 2021 until last week. Diverse schools have a long-term positive effect on the health of the country, economy, and democracy. These effects include providing students with the skills, tools, and the desire to navigate increasingly diverse environments as adults. Racially and socioeconomically diverse schools can blunt the rise in hate crimes in the country is experiencing by giving students more opportunities to meaningfully interact with and learn from diverse groups of students. Integration will ultimately decrease bias and fear. In addition, the Biden-Harris administration even created the Fostering Diverse Schools Grant Program, which last year awarded $67 million to schools that improved school conditions for student learning by supporting voluntary efforts to increase school socioeconomic diversity in preschool through grade 12. Removing diversity from elementary schools in Portsmouth is not our answer. I'm grateful that the current plan addresses the needs of families being kept together and kids remaining at their current schools, but nothing is being done to promote the health and balance of Portsmouth elementary schools. I believe this current plan will cause a long-term inequity within the city of Portsmouth. This inequity will likely not arise during your term or terms as school board members. Therefore, I believe it's irresponsible to vote to pass this plan, knowing that there will be future consequences left for others to manage. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Do we have another speaker?
Mariah Morgan, 18 Monroe Street. This process has been an interesting exercise in examining what is best for my family versus what I feel is best for this community. On principle, I believe that parents should be trusted to make the right decision for their children. And there have been a lot of squeaky wheels, myself included, in this process who have echoed these sentiments or similar opinions. But at the last redistricting committee meeting, several parents brought up their concerns about the lack of attention to socioeconomic equity in the plan being proposed. During the discussion after public comment, committee members verbally acknowledged that yes, this is one of the items on their list that was difficult to accomplish in this plan. And while I appreciate that acknowledgement, I also feel it's problematic to acknowledge it but not address it. Nobody wants to talk about money or income or what some have versus what others might, but I think in order to make educated decisions for the betterment of our community as a whole, we have to find a way to have that conversation. In the last 14 years that I've lived in Portsmouth, this town has seen tremendous change. And I'm not even from here, so I've heard what some of the old timers have to say too. In the last year, my family's home assessment went up 40%. Our taxes went up $4,000 this year and have nearly doubled since we purchased our house. The median home sale price in Portsmouth at present is $873,000, and the average price of homes sold in Lafayette Park alone in the last 6 months was an average of $1.19 million. Yes, the cost of living has increased significantly as well. Yes, there are homeowners like my family who bought their home for literally $1 million less than what it is now valued at, but maintain a very similar income to what we did back then. The struggle to stay is present not just in public housing or what might normally be considered low-income homes. No one is calling anyone in this situation rich or poor for that matter. Maybe you are. Great for you if you're rich. What I'm saying is within the context of Portsmouth today, the neighborhoods being moved away from Dondero in the proposed scenario are two of the school's wealthier neighborhoods. I say that in quotes because it's all contextual, and that the removal of these two neighborhoods represents a significant shift in the demographics of the school. A similar generalization can probably be made about the removal of Powder House from New Franklin. Another parent stated last week that Little Harbor is already perceived by the community as the wealthier of the elementary schools, again in quotes, and I think that perception needs to be faced. In times that feel unpredictable, I have leaned greatly on the joy I find in this Portsmouth community, a place where I can generally count on thoughtful decisions being made for the greater good. It's a community I'm proud to be a part of, and I would like that magic to be preserved as much as possible. So in sum, as grateful as I am to have choice and grandfathering built into this proposal, the fact that socioeconomic equity and not just equity of space in our schools was not a primary driver of decision-making does not sit right with me. It's unlikely that this will get revisited if this proposal gets passed. It has been a tough go, and I think we'd all be relieved to have this behind us, but this proposal does manage to quell the squeaky wheels. I encourage you, as this community's school board, meant to represent all students, not just the children of the squeaky wheels, to take a pause before you vote and consider that this is a proposal that does exacerbate a problem that already exists in this community. And if the course of the town's evolution continues as is, will only be more and more obvious over the years.
Thank you. All right. Would anyone else like to speak? Do we have anyone on Zoom that would like to speak?
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay. Thank you all. Many of you have been to every single meeting we've had, and we appreciate your input, your concern, your compassion. Thank you. It's a lot, and we appreciate it. We will move on to old business, consideration and approval of
Is there anybody
redistricting.
online?
Pardon me?
There wasn't anybody online?
No.
Not asking to.
Sorry.
Before I hand it over to Carrie and Byron, I just want to say thank you to you two. Certainly have devoted your whole being to this project. And like we've said before, this is probably the most challenging project that a school board is faced with, redistricting, because it's emotional, it involves families. It's probably the hardest thing we have to do. And Carrie and Byron, thank you for taking it on. Thank you for the research you did, for the many meetings that you had together, reaching out to the community so many times. It's admirable, and you both deserve the Academy Award or whatever. I also want to thank our principals, Joanne, Erin, and Kate, who isn't able to be with us tonight, and Phil. you guys have put in your whole heart and soul to this too, and it's not easy because it affects your students, it affects your families, it affects the makeup of your school. So thank you for being so dedicated and so honest about how you feel about the whole situation. And a thank you to our superintendent, Zach, who attended every single meeting, had good input, gave his whole heart and soul also. So thank you. It's been a good group, and we appreciate everything everyone has done to make this happen. So with that, I will hand it over.
Could I move
Byron?
to suspend the rules to move the selection of the ethics appointment to right now?
Sure, we can do it.
Second.
Just because it seems like it'd be really quick and it'd be, I'm afraid that the next conversation is gonna be quite long.
And so that everybody understands, the city has a board of ethics. And, oh, do we have a vote to move it up in the
I
agenda?
seconded. I think.
Yeah, we need
yeah.
roll call. Tish is online.
Oh, okay, we need a roll call.
We need 2/3.
Oh, and we need 2/3, okay?
Okay, Liz Barrett,
Yes.
Tish Campbell,
Yes.
Nancy Claiberg.
Yes.
Pip Blues,
Yes.
Brian French.
Yes.
Byron Matto.
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport.
Yes.
Yes. Right, just to explain briefly, the Board of Ethics, the city created a few years ago, and it monitors elected officials' behavior. So if an elected official doesn't behave appropriately, the Board of Ethics can investigate. We always laugh because it's a tedious,
And there, I would say there is, ordinance defines very clearly what is, what types of behavior would be out of line.
Right.
It's not just general, if people think, you behave badly, it's very specific activities that you can be in trouble.
Specific.
So,
anyway, so there's a city councilor, a school board member, a police commissioner, and a fire commissioner is on this board. So we have to pick a name out of a hat. And
out of envelope. Out of envelope. This is for the next year, this would be the school board person who would, if the board was called upon, this would be the school board. person.
Brian.
Went off.
Brian.
Grab my own name.
choices.
No, this is like,
Tish Campbell.
Oh. Is that what I get for not being there?
Congratulations, Tish.
You can't come, Tish. Thank you, Tish. Hopefully they won't be calling on you, so. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will move on to the consideration and approval of redistricting, and I hand it over to our two outstanding leaders, Byron and Kerry.
Thank you, Nancy. So, yeah, I think Gary and I worked on some slides that, pull out the majority of what's in the report. I think, many of the folks in this room have been through this material before. But definitely I think it's appropriate in this context to go through, robustly what we have for all the board members in the community in this context. So if I am.
Oh, I'm Sharon.
Oh, you're Shay? Great. I think I have the first go at it.
Quick question, sorry. Are you going over this as well? Is this sort of built into your slides? I just want to clarify. that.
Yes, so
Okay.
the slides are essentially almost 100% verbatim of what's in
this.
from
Okay.
that. There's a little bit of call outs on numbers in this presentation, but there's nothing here that isn't in that.
So in from this point on, where there's the specific report and discussion, it's really just divided up by each of, like, it's copy and pasted, because when we've tried to share the document before and review it and discuss it, it's just been hard. So it's a copy, it's a cut and paste just to facilitate discussion.
Oh, and just before we get started, I wanted to call out, and I'm sure we'll put it on the redistricting website, is we published an interactive map.
it's on there now.
That's on there now, that has, so anyone can go and zoom in on the neighborhoods and see specifically what streets. I think what's that?
I saw that.
I think the recommendation for actually printing street names is probably good too. We should probably do that in terms of like addresses, since we can probably get that list. But I think the best now is that interactive map. You can zoom in on specific neighborhoods and see the specific boundaries as they're defined.
I would just say on the site now, we've shuffled the tabs, so I think it might be the first tab on the site. And if you go to it, there's the
Yeah.
map of the current setup
Yeah.
and the proposed setup
Perfect.
side by side, and they're both interactive. You can zero in. Stuff.
Yeah, and I spent some time making sure that we didn't inadvertently draw any lines. So there's like a
Right.
cutout down on like where Tucker's Cove meets, where like Elwyn kind of like the road.
Mhm.
So tried to capture all of that as well to make sure that it's as accurate as possible in terms of what's on there.
Can I just ask a quick
mhm.
question about that?
Yeah.
specifically? So where there are lines that are on a road, would half of the road be in one
So the,
district and half be the other, like the one side of the street?
yes, and that's how, I mean, the
That's not
line has to,
again.
that line has to exist somewhere, and it's different in different places, like sometimes it's split across the street, sometimes it's inclusive of both sides of the street. So,
But when they overlap, when they follow a street,
Yes,
it's
yeah.
one side or the other. Okay, thanks.
all right, so. Yeah, those are the, yeah, good, so the resources there, so, yeah, jumping right into, the review of the district share, so this is back looking, last 10 years, you know, as we said before, we've seen this decrease in Little Harbor, this sort of growth over time at Dondero, and this relatively flat, New Franklin population. That's the last 10 years. This is from NASDAQ actuals. So this is not any, this is actual numbers from the last 10 years. Let's go. And then just seen a different way, as a stacked chart there, but same numbers. And this calls out, district share. So left number is current. This is for Dondero. So Dondero currently has 36%, but projected to go to 41% without a plan in the next 10 years. And they have 19 classrooms, and of the current 55 sections that we have in the district, that represents 35%. And so the next slide is a similar for Little Harbor. We thought it was a typo at first that 36.4% was the same for Little Harbor and Dondero, but it is not. They are both right there, I think within like 2 students of each other. And so we've seen this decrease over time. Little Harbor, it's moving to 29%, where their district share of classrooms. Now this is a little bit of a, we're saying the ideal there is 22. That's, you know, if assuming we have 55 sections continually going forward, that's the target there. At Little Harbor is 22 classrooms, though there are 24 natural, so that leaves still 2 classrooms at Little Harbor that can be used for other services. And again, the district share of classrooms at 22 is 40%. Gary. Sorry. The district share, this is for New Franklin. So at 27, or was at 27, will be at 28%. And their current district share is 25. That's I believe that's 14 classrooms is estimated there, and that's the ideal at New Franklin. Currently they're at 15. They have the 1 extra that they're using for services. So that's looking back at the district share. So, and then I want to take a moment to talk about the specific identified neighborhoods, talking about Powder House, Lafayette Park, and Hillside. If we move forward, we have this map here. Again, this map is published so you can zoom in and see specific streets, but I wanted to present it in this way here. So, because one of the things about this particular plan is that these 3 neighborhoods border each other. And this presents opportunity in terms of logistics for transportation. But another benefit from this is that for Lafayette Park and Hillside, their neighboring neighborhoods don't go to the same schools as them. So this, the neighborhood park at Lafayette Park is oftentimes, there's different kids from different schools there because, so this, I think, to some degree sort of brings together a group of neighborhoods which have otherwise been distinct from each other. So with those 3 neighborhoods, and look, we saw what the neighborhood share was going to be, or the district share was going to be in the schools. If we take those 3 neighborhoods and we transition them over time, this is the projected transition where green, it represents the projected enrollment, and blue is what would happen, sort of the base trend. So if we did nothing, that would continue that way. And then red and yellow here sort of represent the transition of students into Little Harbor School, where red is sort of a tale of grandfathered students, and yellow represents incoming transition. So, you know, kindergarten the first year, first grade, and kindergarten the second year, so on and so forth. And so that's what this chart is looking at.
Can I ask?
Yes. Mhm.
I don't think I understand grandfathered in this. Is this people that are, this is not people moving out of,
So if
It comes up on here.
yeah.
okay.
So we can maybe.
Yeah, so if you want to go to the next, so I think this is, right, so this is just looking back Little Harbor actuals, and we'll get to this question on the next slide, I think. So if, current transition, where is, so if, this is Little Harbor projection.
Do you want me to go out to
Yeah.
the sheet
Yeah,
instead?
there's the, okay, so if we zoom in, there's a column. The grandfathered population. So in 25-26, there's going to be, of the 90 some odd students that are in the 3 affected neighborhoods, 80 of them will be grandfathered, will be in that grandfathered category. 25% is sort of an estimate of how many of those students we think will actually move to Little Harbor. So, and then the next year, that number of that population of grandfathered students gets smaller because they sort of age out, and then that 25% naturally gets smaller as well. So that's the grandfathered tail. And then the incoming transition is somewhat the inverse of that, where the first year it'll be kindergarten and so on and so forth. But there's a slice taken out of the incoming transition as well, because there are siblings in that group as well. So there's some art in here in terms of estimating, how many will be in that group. We don't know for sure. But I think it's important so if we go back to the chart, or the visualization.
This?
Yeah. So we know we're sort of going to be, we have relative high confidence of where we're going to be at the beginning of the line, and we have relatively high confidence where we're going to be at the end of the line. I think the shape between the start and the end, there's a little bit variant in terms of, what to expect. We've done the best to project what it'll be based on sort of the survey data that we got. But I think there's some variance there. But that said, I think it's within tolerances in terms of what the schools can hold. So I think we're in a good place. We sort of have I think it would be more difficult if all the schools were in such a overcrowded way. That would make transitioning more difficult, right? Okay, so we move on. Yeah, so Dondero is similar chart. The only difference is red and yellow represent an outgoing cohort as opposed to an incoming cohort. So blue is what would happen at Dondero, and green represents with this transition. What's interesting about Dondero and Little Harbor in the transition projection is it maintains a steady population over all of the 10 years. So I think one of the benefits of taking the transition approach as opposed to one big shift is that it actually maintain, if the curve is as projected, we maintain a steady population both Little Harbor and Dondero. And then lastly, New Franklin, similar in terms of outgoing cohort, red and yellow, the Dondero. You have this, the scale is a little bit different here. So it looks like like a bigger increase than it really is, but a slight increase over time, which is the opposite way of where we want to be going at New Franklin. We want to be reducing the population so we can invest in the space there. And again, Green Line is with the plan. So those are the three sort of projected scenarios there. So one thing we wanted to talk through is at the last redistricting meeting, we heard from Joanne around the free and reduced lunch numbers and how the numbers we had in our data set didn't match what was reported to the state. So we got the numbers from the new numbers from the district that I think better match what's been reported or should be the actuals. And that's what's on the left. So New Franklin, this is percentage of free and reduced in the school. So New Franklin at 20%, Dondero at 17%, Little Harbor at 11. I think in our original numbers we had
we were around 11 to 14.
Yeah.
And so as we talked about that, they would go up and down a percentage, which is similar to this.
Yes.
But in both last year's data set and this year's data set that we were provided and had been working from, those numbers were underestimates for both New Franklin and Dondero.
I think, yeah. So I was undercounting both of those schools from the data sets that we had. What remains true from the last meeting to this meeting is that the change, and I think it's really interesting at Little Harbor, is that we actually saw no change in Little Harbor in terms of so Little Harbor will remain at 11%. So I don't think it's, I wouldn't say that the Little Harbor population district, like their distribution of free and reduced lunch changes with this plan. It stays the same. In New Franklin, there's 1% increase, in Dondero, 1.5% increase. I should also say that those increases come from not an increase of students that have free and reduced lunch in those schools, right? So the burden of, or the services that are required relative to those is not increasing. That's just the overall population is decreasing, and that's how you see the percentage increase. And again, while it does move somewhat marginal in terms of 1% New Franklin, 1.5 Dondero.
This is after 10 years.
This is so that's a tough question to answer. So I think this is if you took the population now and moved them all over, that's what that would be. So I think in 10 years, I mean, I think development in the Dondero catchment area, development in the New Franklin area, continued trend in terms of socioeconomic in the city could render 10 years like a different picture. Yeah.
Sure.
And I think, you know, I wish that we had been, you know, using data that was correct, as Joanne told us. And we were like, we reanalyzed it. And now we have identified where that problem comes from. I don't know where we found that magic database, but I think that regardless of whether it's 16 or 20%, the transition in order to get to whatever the average is, 15% across, would be really dividing up neighborhoods that drive free and reduced lunch. So we have 4 neighborhoods that are, I think, 92% of those numbers.
That's right.
And so with that, then we get to move one of those neighborhoods to Little Harbor. Currently, there's 1 at New Franklin, 1 at Dondero, 2 at Little Harbor, 2 smaller neighborhoods, right?
Yes.
And so to move those, that would be a lot of transition for those families. I do think there's an opportunity to do it differently. We don't know what that opportunity is, but we also are really reluctant to call out a neighborhood or to cut out a neighborhood from the map that does not want to go to Little Harbor because of low socioeconomic status, to sort of do some sort of modern day busing of folks to a wealthier school. I think that, and I don't really mean that, they all are different. I think the other interesting conversation among the last redistricting committee is that free and reduced lunch is one measure It's a very flawed measure. We don't have good data in the city or in the state in order to do this a different way currently. So there's definitely some opportunity to do city census, do, different things, look at other need-based factors, look at a variety of things. But that's not something that would be well beyond the school department. It would really be on the city. So I would say that after sort of the reanalysis of this today, because we got the numbers, the database yesterday, was that our plan is, we still recommend our plan. It's the same 1% increase or approximately, but it's not, but the baseline numbers of New Franklin and Dondero are what are different.
I think what's challenging about this issue is that it's less transparent than other elements of what we've been doing, because people are entitled to their privacy about their personal socioeconomic status. But I can say, as you go through, you look through the data, we talked about neighborhoods as being the unit. There's no neighborhood solution to 15%, 15%, 15% across the community. It's just like micro targeting. And you would have to break up portions of those for neighborhoods. And say these 3 streets inside of this neighborhood are going, but you're gonna stay. And it's in order to make sure in a single snapshot of a projected time 10 years from now, we would hit 15, 15, 15. So anyways, I think, as you go back through the data, there isn't a fix that isn't this type of micro targeting.
Yeah.
And I'll also say that one of our first plans that did not go over well with anyone really was, did get to, again, the data the data that was driving that was probably a bit off anyway, but there was a 5 neighborhood move in like early phases of discussion that was the closest to sort of equalizing this, but it disrupted like a third of the kids in the city. So that was sort of.
Yeah, I think it involved like Wamisit to Little Harbor and then Ledgewood to Dondero. So it flipped because I think one of those has
And
more than the
Osprey
other.
to New Frank,
then-
it just
yeah,
moved
yeah,
everyone.
yeah, yeah.
And I think the logistics and busing would have been that there would be no grandfathering, in that situation, which was also part of what sort of drove this.
And it underlines another thing which we've talked about before, which is folks want to stay in the school that they're in. All 3 elementary schools do a great job delivering services. People are, unsurprisingly possessive of their schools and their communities. Yeah.
And when we first got the survey back, my first look was like, what neighborhoods want to go? Like, let's find that neighborhood that we got 10 responses that are like, we all want to move, and that's not there. So
Right.
I think that was one of the conversations about equity, or one of our drivers was like to move a neighborhood that we're saying free and has more free and reduced lunch than other neighborhoods who doesn't want to go is sort of like a very forced form of equity that isn't equitable at all. So it just thinking about the challenges that maybe experience and adding another transition, lack of transport, our transportation systems are sort of also developed around supporting families too. I'm blabbing now, sorry. Any questions on this or any other? Yeah.
Well, it's not so much a question as a possibility, which is to consider, like, instead of considering the free and reduced lunch rates, which we've heard is not a very accurate measure, what about like the average home cost of a neighborhood? Because I think what people spoke to tonight brings up a good point that these neighborhoods that we're talking about are fairly expensive real estate locations. So while that doesn't necessarily translate to socioeconomic status, it could be just as good a measure as free and reduced lunch rates. If we don't want to target the areas where that's more likely, then
I think it's a potential. There's nothing I can find about that. Like, there's no historic, like, there's no publication that's like, here's how you would do this. I think part of it is that, like, you know, uh, many of us bought our houses for way, way, way less than they sell for now. And even struggle to afford that mortgage payment. And so it's just really hard to say, like, when that is, or what time that is, or how we configure that, or, you know, maybe it's like turnover and recent turnover, but you're then trying to get a proxy for parental income. And it's not necessarily,
Yeah.
also the right measure
Necessarily
of.
be accurate, but it would be a way of not targeting the low income neighborhoods in the way that you were, because I agree with you that plucking the lowest income neighborhoods, it doesn't feel that good. But
It's-
sort
yeah.
of averaging it out across the town might work better.
I think I think we're still targeting like, it's still targeting a lower socioeconomic group of people to move. If we take that approach.
I see.
Yeah. It's just through it's a different proxy in terms of the data to get there.
Yeah. True, but
yeah.
I think what Carrie was referring to was the 4 neighborhoods that
Yes.
tend to have the highest free and reduced lunch.
And, but yeah, so those are Portsmouth Housing Authority supported
Right.
sites. So those are identifiable, they're on their plans, they're on their website, things like that.
Mhm.
I think when you get into more the specifics that you're talking about, you know, we have a lot of, and one of the conversations that I don't know if it actually comes up in the report, but is not transients.
Transients, yeah.
Like essentially, you know, rent versus own, and you know, neighborhoods that have a lot of turnover where there's like 20 new kids every year. And a lot of it is for jobs that folks are renting when they initially get into the area and things like that. We did talk about that. There isn't a great metric or mapping for Portsmouth for like rentable units versus, I mean, I think you can, you know, the big complexes, probably, we all probably know the big complexes. But again, the way that the geography is, as you can imagine, it would be sort of the same phenomenon of sort of busing from this part of town where there's more rental properties or, and more complexes, not just rental, because there's rental properties everywhere.
Well, I think it's all a balance of walkability versus socioeconomic status when you're talking about Little Harbor, unfortunately, just based on the home values in those neighborhoods. But initially, I know we talked about having a realtor on this committee, and I think that's where you would get some of that information. Did you guys consult with a realtor?
We did, that was never a conversation that we had as part of the committee.
Earlier version.
I think, I mean,
It was
Yeah.
the
Because I think that's
prior,
who has that information. I mean, they know where rental rates are. Anyway, I'm just saying, I think it's it's accessible. It's
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess
not-
I guess it historic, 10 years ago, I think, like, or I don't know, we bought our house 12 years ago. There was like 10 real estate realtors around. There's thousands right now. And it's like,
Still 10.
yeah.
I mean, I guess part of it is then like, who's the person driving that? What's their bias? And like, oh, they've been selling Little Harbor as the best district to move into. They want that, like, I think I'd worry about bias from that.
I think that could be said of anyone doing any of this work, but anyway.
Do we want to
Let's move
finish with
to-
the presentation, or do we want to take?
Well,
questions
we've
now?
already started taking questions,
I
Nancy.
know,
so-
but
This is,
let's decide what we want to do. Do we want to finish with the
I think-
presentation?
Pip just talked, so I think we
Can you
like,
just
we have to have
wait?
the opportunity to be able to talk, Nancy.
Let's let Carrie and Byron decide
Is it,
whether they want to.
Nancy, I'm sorry, but you
just
just
let
let
us,
Pip
we're,
ask
it's
a
gonna be
question.
fine.
I have
Liz.
my hand up and Brian has their hands up, so instead of stalling and asking everybody, I think it's gonna make sense. Pip had her
No,
turn,
let's
now I need to
finish.
have my turn, Brian
Just
needs to have his turn.
Let's just stop. This is the end of some of the new data and the things we just wanted to go through for an explanation. We can take questions upon this and have conversation around this. The next portion will be specifically each segment of that report. So if your question is regarding,
Yes,
this?
this is exactly what my.
could I finish?
It's, I feel like we're gonna be here all night at this rate, like.
It's not
Let her
mine.
finish.
It's not on me.
Let her finish.
So if it is about this, let's hold questions to this. And then we'll go through each of those background pieces. And then we did not introduce our the board requested members to appear tonight. And I think we've all said that Phil, Aaron, and Joanne are here. But I don't know if how we want to do questions, or Byron and I can handle them and defer, or whatever makes the most sense, I think.
My concern with going a full discussion right now is that it might be helpful to have the rest of the context of the report before we do that.
I
But-
think to move forward, let's then have Liz ask her question about
Okay.
free and reduced lunch, and
Okay.
then we can go from there.
Okay.
I guess for me, it was more of a statement. I think the numbers right now, you're looking at the same, it's no surprise to me that New Franklin has the highest percentage of free and reduced lunch. And then Dondero's next right after them. And then Little Harbor has 0.5% of what New Franklin has. So I think what this is telling me is that whatever the new plan is not addressing from an equity standpoint, a disbursement of income and diversity in that aspect, socioeconomic diversity. I think the other thing, the transient bit that you bring up, as well as the families coming in here, I think there's families that aren't using free and reduced lunch and that are living in neighborhoods with lower means. So I think for me, this because it shows me that this plan is still not going to be equitable when it comes to social and economic diversity. I think you mentioned busing, but we bus from Atlantic Heights over to Little Harbor. So if that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. But I mean, I understand diversity and socioeconomic diversity is somewhat going by the wayside these times, but this does illustrate to me that the plan that is being proposed is not going to have a full look at the equity of diversity of income.
Nathan, would you like to comment on free and reduced lunch, or these numbers here?
Sure, I just want to clarify something here. So Liz, is what you're saying, you want to see all those numbers the same? You want?
No, I'm just saying that I think this is exactly, if I was thinking about our schools from what everybody says, or the stereotypes, I guess, this is exactly what I would think it would
Let's
look
let Nathan finish his question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to clarify in my head here, because if your job as a redistricting committee was to make these numbers socioeconomically equal, this plan would not be what it looks like right now. And this was taken into consideration, and you see the minor changes from the schools separated before and after the plan. And what I think is sort of opposite, it's that it shows you that you took this into account and there's the least amount of difference in the end, and you keep it how it is. Because the arguments that were being made here is that you weren't taking into account, and now we're not going to be socioeconomically diverse at our schools. I guess what I see here is that you still are.
Can I just
Thank
make
you, Nathan.
one last comment on this,
And then
I
we'll
just,
go on.
I just think if you try to homogenize this, it does seem like you're gonna have to move a lot of people. And no matter if you use your, the house value or free and reduced lunch, you're gonna have to cherry pick. And
Yeah.
probably the best way to do it is just anybody, it doesn't matter where you're at, just, we're gonna put you in this school, and forget about walkability, forget about other things. So it's a big challenge, but I think this seems a lot more disruptive, and to your point, if somebody bought a house today, they're probably wealthy enough to buy that $1 million house versus somebody 10 years ago who'd be struggling in that same multi-million-dollar house. So it's hard to use that, in my mind, as a data point. And that was my only comments.
I think too, that the resources develop around students too. And so like part of it is like the neighborhood connection, the disruption of movement is a factor, but it's not the best number, but also or it's not the best number to use. The most equitable solution is to have banded schools, K-1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you have all of Portsmouth at those schools. And we've already talked about the transportation costs would almost double, probably like 700,000 or so. And that, then there'd be transitions every 2 years for kids. And within that, you disrupt. So that might be a great idea when we have really ineffective schools, terrible cultures, coworkers that don't want to work with each other, and lots of infighting, but that's not what we have. And so I think, part of it is just understanding the disruption of systems and teams in doing something like that. And we would see that effectiveness drop. So just.
Okay, why don't you guys continue?
Lisa, real quick.
Oh, Lisa.
It is on this topic, but I think we've gone through this process with a lot of different lenses for how we want to look at the disparities that we're seeing across our elementary schools and what the best way is for us to address it in the most effective way. And it feels like we started with a question about class size, then we started about a question of the percentage of kids in each building versus the percentage of total classrooms. And now we're talking about socioeconomic status. And I guess my question for, our administrators here is, I guess, what do you see as the biggest, it's hard to pick which is the most important disparity to tackle because they're all important. But I'm trying to wrestle when I'm voting, are we addressing the one that people generally think is the most important one to address in the right way? I guess that's what my question is. And so I don't know if anyone feels like they want to weigh in on that, but that's, I guess, how I'm thinking about it. And I'm not sure if I know the right answer.
Yeah, I think throughout, so right from, I think the first time we met, or within the first or second meeting we met, we established those principles as guidelines, all these things that we were trying to do. And I think Carrie talked about this, I think the last meeting, where we're trying to pull at all those threads at the same time. I think the evolution has been that some of our early drafts gave less parental choice. And through consultation with the community, both from people coming in and voicing their opinions, and through the survey work, over and over again, that came forward as a priority amongst stakeholders. And so, so I think that has gained some traction in the conversation. But I don't think we've ever lost track of that equity issue. We've never thrown our arms up and been like, no, equity, we're not going to deal with equity. I think it's always been in the conversation. It's just been trying to figure out what is that final, where are we trying to get? And again, if it was, in my head, I'd love it to be 15, 15, 15. But while trying to incorporate these other things, proximity to schools, maintaining neighborhood schools, not splitting families, giving families choice, doing all of those things. And we haven't exacerbated the problem. But beyond that, that makes it sound like there's a clear solution outside of banded schools. When I say that, it makes it sound like there might be a clear solution outside of banded schools if we just switched a couple of neighborhoods around. I just don't see it. It's not there unless we break up neighborhoods. And it's not, and you could say, when I say that, I want to be really specific about what I mean there too, because it's not, we drew some maps about what neighborhoods were. And it's not whether we included 2 more streets in Portsmouth Plains or not. It's around where the concentrated pockets of folks who have students who are free and reduced eligible are. And the only way you could further break it up, as far as I can see, and I think this is what you guys saw as you went through the data, was to slice up some of those neighborhoods in ways that would be really, I think, Byron, you've done a good job of articulating this lately. You haven't used this word like disenfranchising, but really kind of in some ways disenfranchising people, removing choice from people because they're of lower socioeconomic status, and giving choice to people really in the community who are more empowered.
Correct.
Right. And so I think that's because and I think that's become kind of a thing that we've really jostled with down the stretch, is if that's the solution, going to those neighborhoods and saying, you don't get choice.
Yeah.
But your wealthier neighbors down the street,
They got the choice.
who have the ability to advocate, they got choice. But it's for your own good. We're going to send you to some other place that's further away from where you are geographically. in order to achieve that goal when it would only be on the margins.
Yeah, and I think it's specifically more acute in Portsmouth because we have the three strong schools.
Right.
Because no, like it would be different if there was one school that was particularly sort of like lower performing, or there were certain aspects of those schools that presented in different ways. But that's not, yeah.
Ironically,
Yeah.
what's our highest ranked elementary school at all measures?
Franklin.
It's New Franklin.
Yeah.
School,
Yeah.
Right. So, across a bunch of different measures. So, I think that's also the thing. We're not trying to drive people, anyways, I think we have three excellent schools. Yeah.
I think we should move through the rest of the report and come back.
So I think that at this point, this will just take, for the first pieces, we'll just ask questions about what's in the report. I think to go through it and then get to like the meat of the recommendation. So I think we've already hit on sort of what our approach was, what the principles were. And you've seen this time and time again. Does anyone have questions or these background pieces? And then, as we've shared with the board previously, the additional problems from where we started were primarily three, although you could say there's 100 different little things that came up. But the strategy had been to move new developments into Little Harbor, and that's how we were addressing it. But really, that wasn't a driver of the change. It wasn't working. And then overall decreasing enrollment trends, and then the New Franklin school space constraints, and just the differences in space utilization across those. And then this was already on, I think, one of our presentations, but just differences in spaces, dedicated OT space at one school, and other use of smaller rooms for individual instruction and intervention. Questions or comments on that section? As we have shared with the board before, we had removed sort of reorganizing schools by bands, which was just discussed. There's also a great resource from Phil around the impacts of moving the 5th grade to the middle school and or the 8th grade to the high school. And so those were considered, but omitted from sort of further analysis after initial feedback and learning of logistics. Questions on those? Yeah.
You've mentioned this presentation from Phil. Is that something that has been publicized? I haven't.
On the redistricting website.
It is. Okay. What is it? Where do you find it? Just so.
If you want to pull it up, I can help you, but I think it would be
Like, what is it?
September. It's like a
So
power,
it
it's a
was a meeting.
PowerPoint.
It was during one of your meetings?
It
Or
was,
when was it? Like, where was it?
it was a meeting of
How did
me,
it?
Byron,
come
and Phil, yes.
July 5th.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
July 5th. Thank you.
Okay,
Study.
but that's.
Because who doesn't want to come in the day after the 4th of July to do?
So it's probably under meetings and materials or whatever.
Yeah, I'll send
He was
Taking my
he
kid
was
to
up in
college.
Maine.
Stop by.
send the link to you.
Something by and give me a.
I'd say broad things were the needing to scale back to only offering United Arts offerings that are required by the state based on the space that would be required, and pretty significant renovation in order to modify classrooms. Yes.
So this might be a question for Phil, just because I didn't see the July PowerPoint and I apologize, but I can understand the space constraint if we had you become a 4-grade school. But can you help me just sort of briefly understand what would be the constraint if we moved up 5th and moved 8th to the high school? And I'm sure that's a whole other can of worms at the high school too, but I'm just curious.
One of the can of
Yeah.
worms at the high school. The map and the PowerPoint that I built were looking at moving 5th to the current 6th through 8 structure.
Gotcha. Okay.
And which would eliminate a great number of unified arts and reconfigure pieces of the building so that you still have middle school structure and kind of the pod structure of the school. So the 5th grade classes could stay together, 6th grade classes could stay together. So it'd be a loss of a lot of classes. I know in talking with Portsmouth High School, just in hearing a little bit about the number of classroom spaces that they would actually have available, it would really take 8 full classrooms to take my entire 8th grade. or our entire eighth grade to the high school, and that would be without student support centers. And I believe there's 4 or 5 open classrooms currently at the high school. If they condensed everything, I don't know, there's 4 or 5 just standing open rooms at the high school right now, but according to Steve Canosi, if they condensed, I think he could get maybe 5 classrooms out. And so that would, and I have no idea what that would look like mapping.
No, that's really helpful, and
certainly
I can
throw
look up
away
the
your-
rest later. It's just nice to have the cliff notes for the purpose of. Thank you.
I'm just looking. So this is from Bill's PowerPoint. It's actually listed October 30th, so I'm not.
Yeah, it was in the summer. Yeah. It was-
No, I met with you.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We'll find it.
But then we brought it back out at other meetings. and-
Yeah.
it was-
And so this was just the overview that we can look at, but PMS could physically accommodate 5th grade with incredible disruption. Unified arts offering would no longer be exploratory. Art, PE, music, performing arts would be greatly weakened, and then the physical infrastructure and potential addition of music.
All right.
Would anyone like to comment on Byron's methodology? Hearing none. Brian, can you just ask a really hard question just for my entertainment?
Sure. Oh, Brian, yeah, go for it. No? Okay, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
And then we have just some broad feedback, concern about split sibling, and sort of less choice.
Can I just say one thing about methodology? If we, at one point, we had some, there was some, I think I've talked to folks and say, well, what if we went out to a consultant? We would have no more complex a methodology than this, and we would do it for tens of thousands of dollars. So I just want to acknowledge that the quality of this work, this is a slide that's very easy to skip over, but there's hours and hours and hours and hours of work from people who are not paid staff members to create this and to make it work the way that it worked. And we could have contracted this out, probably got a lesser product with that cost us more money to produce. So I just wanted kudos to the two of them and their skill sets in their other lives. And the amount of work and recasting and resetting that was involved in this methodology. And we skip this slide all the time, but it's unbelievably important. So I just want to point, it's like a PhD.
I have a
thesis.
question.
How to do it.
Yes, Liz.
I guess I'm wondering, with everything that has been put into place and all of these data sets that you have, I think we'll probably get to a point where you're going to talk about what we're going to do in the future, but is this going to be easily transitioned in one piece? You're using all these different applications.
So the source, this is gonna sound nerdy. So the source code for all of this is already public. There's no data associated with it, but all the source code I wrote is already public online for anyone to use. And I can include that as well. So if anyone wanted to pick up the pieces and continue to work on it, they'd be free to do so.
Okay.
And I think we could also add geocoding easily to our database in order to have
I love good source code talk.
There you go.
that was another,
That'd be the meeting, source
the lookup and the errors and that was challenging. Okay, out of geekiness and into practical things. So I did want to comment around, so we came to the 3 neighborhood plan. And then we had sort of, I will say that we both felt pretty assured that that was a good fix to the problem, but we got more and more feedback, especially from New Franklin families, that it really didn't address the concerns at New Franklin. That was part of why we had considered 5 neighborhoods in order to, and with 2 additional neighborhoods from New Franklin. And in the meantime, Byron did all this work on the projections. Because what we knew in us being so in the data was we knew the decreased rates, we knew the numbers, but we really hadn't done the projections. And so that is the change from December to now, I would say. Although one of those pieces that's helpful to solidify that is feasible and we think it will have the intended impacts is the NESDEC data. They really didn't change. All they did was confirm that there's no immediate increase anticipated. If anything, it was a little lower. But it's really the flip from we need to include more New Franklin neighborhoods back to 3 neighborhoods was the projections, including that data point from any NESDEC. Any questions on? And actually that came after the community survey, so maybe not. Where's your question?
Well, you can decide whether it's a good time to answer it or not, but I would just wondered if you might address the question that someone from the public asked about how that number that changed enough to make us take out those 2 neighborhoods won't impact year to year how this plan might work.
Yeah, that's what I tried to just address. Do you want to do it in a different way?
No, I think there's, I think what Carrie was trying to iterate there is that, between the time we added the 2 neighborhoods in, sort of 2 things happened. One, which is more impactful, is we spent more time on projections. So we went back in and like produced that spreadsheet with like over 10 years, given the grandfathering population and the incoming transition. And then the NESDEC numbers were marginally lower. They were like 2% lower across the district. And that was part of that reanalysis. I think the specific, Atlantic Heights was 15, Meadowbrook was 6. So I think we were definitely erring a little bit on the side of trying to make sure we solve the problem at New Franklin. But I think with the further analysis, we feel like we still solved the problem in terms of creating the space we need to have equal services. And if we don't have to move those neighborhoods, I think it was definitely the right thing to do to not do that. Yeah, so I think I think you do still need to move some amount of the population. Yeah.
So what it sounds like you're saying is that number, you don't expect that number to change enough in future years to have an impact on whether this plan
I think
works?
I agree with your assessment, yes.
Okay.
And I think it was really just that the NESDEC report did not show an influx of 100 new. It was more what it didn't show than what it showed. So it wasn't about the numbers going down by 5 or 10 over the next few years. It was that based on birth rates and the local population that we're not anticipating a bubble.
Well, I think what I'm getting at is more like a longer term question, which is also is impacted by, as somebody said, the board changing over and things like that. So how are people, if we pass this tonight, how are people going to feel confident that we're not going to have to do it all over again next year?
Give them
or
Byron's source code.
I mean, I think we can talk about that more in the
Yeah,
plan.
okay.
I don't think it's
That's
gonna be
fine.
number wise. I think there might, I cannot speak for the political will of,
Right, but you don't think
boards
that the
yet to
numbers are gonna
come.
change enough that this won't last?
well,
Or
at
won't-
least I mean, I think the most accurate time is 5 years because kids were already born, right? So maybe if this year there's like a big old baby boom and then we have 5 years to project that we're gonna have a big K class.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
don't think, I think because it's based on birth rate in localities.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on, sorry, I sort of skipped through a bunch of this because I started talking about this part. But
was-
6, 7, or 8, anything else from the,
Just in terms of longevity, and we talked about this of the agree, kind of the plan / agreement, I think there's also a political reality to this, right? Which is nobody's wanted to touch this for like whatever, 15 to 20 years, because people know inherently that it is all the things that Nancy talked about at the beginning. I don't necessarily foresee that other folks are gonna wanna dive into this. I mean, I mean, I don't know if you look at these two and kind of, you know, as they stagger into meetings sometimes and get ready to go back through it, I don't think there's gonna be other people who are like, you know what I'm dying to do? Let's rip back open the redistricting plan. I just don't know that there's gonna be the will to do that because we've kind of gone through a process as a public institution, even though the leadership can turn over, where we said, we think this is the best thing. And it's rooted in trying to make commitments to families who have said, we want to know what's going to happen with our kids. So, you know, there are never any guarantees, but I think that there's a political reality that's reflective of the fact that people talk about this as the third rail of school board politics. I think that will continue. And I think that in some ways families are insulated as a result of that.
Liz.
I guess I just want to speak briefly to that. You know, I was on the redistricting committee in 2022 in October, when there was a memo that came over that said, oh, NESDEC and, you know, no change, and we're going to do these couple communities. And at that time, I had requested layouts of the schools because I knew from being inside Dondero myself that there were spaces being used for services and there was equity concerns for me. And this was pushed off. So I think it's been frustrating for me for this whole process that it's like, oh, this came about because we had trailers at Dondero. Like I've made this an issue since I got on the board. And I am concerned, like Pip, I think that the NESDEC numbers don't give us a reality of what our schools look like, what's inside. And now we have this report that has a highlight on page 2 that says immediate action and long-term investment is needed in New Franklin. And, you know, we wouldn't have had Byron wasn't on the board then, maybe he would have volunteered his time at that point. I wasn't Byron in Byron's position to be able to map out all of these things and whatnot, but I knew I needed to see a map. And I was pushed off. I requested again, you know, in 2023 that this be put on the agenda. I was pushed off. So my concern is that when we go into this in the future, I think we need a committee that continues to look at this regularly, that this is not a committee that goes away and comes back when we think we need it. I think it needs to be an ongoing thing, that we have some checkpoints throughout the year, as well as you bring people in like realtors or, you know, planning board or you know, city council to know what new developments are coming and whatnot, because the reality is NESDEC is not going to tell us, you know, where the spreads are in our classrooms in the schools. So I understand this is a frustrating process, but I do hope that maybe we could take whatever Byron's put together through source code and have NESDEC be like a little side piece for us, you know, to maybe understand our middle school and high school numbers, but it doesn't, to me, NESDEC doesn't fix the elementary issue. And I do think that we need to continue to monitor, you know, what our needs are, whether it's through the facilities committee, you know, looking at facility needs met. But I do share and appreciate Pip's question about NESDEC, because I think that was my biggest frustration in 2022 was that I knew what I was seeing and NESDEC wasn't lining up.
So I appreciate all of those things. I will say with that, there are additional board actions that the board can choose to take to do beyond this redistricting plan. And we have recommendations for what those should be, but I do want to focus on the redistricting plan itself. And if there's no other questions on.
Lisa,
Do you want to talk about this?
Lisa, real quick.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. You can wait? Okay. So this is just sort of in bullet form. There was a slide issue earlier with big numbers. These are smaller numbers, but they're the same ones, about the current district share, and then if you move and if you don't move, and it spells it out for Dondero, New Franklin, and Little Harbor. But we've already seen this visualized, so this is just like more detail on that. It's in the report as well. Yeah, and so the summary of redistricting really is just sort of reiterating that without it, we exceed capacity at Dondero. We probably need to continue the modulars at some point in the future. New Franklin remains constrained, potentially with no flex classrooms. You know, the existing realities of where intervention and special education is happening, and Little Harbor is underutilized. And we balance this out with the plan. So that's like an overall summary there. So this spells out, this next part, the redistricting plan spells out the specifics of grandfathering and transition. And this language has been, we started, I don't know, with this specific language, the transition language after, or going into the December community forum. And then there's been two or three redistricting meetings, two, maybe, the second, and then the 22nd, where we've refined this language with help from the administration on that. So it's the three neighborhoods as we've pointed out before. So net new families into the district in the transition neighborhood will enroll in Little Harbor. And then, can you go back one? Because there's,
Sorry.
yeah. New families to the neighborhood would be attend newly designated schools. So if you moved into this neighborhood from out, somewhere in the state or wherever, you would be in Little Harbor. You would not have sort of grandfathering scenario. Next one, yeah. So starting in 25, so starting next year, students in transition neighborhoods have the opportunity to choose to enroll at Little Harbor. Students who choose to enroll at Little Harbor may not transition back to their current districted school. So this is the one-way open door. And the open door part of it is students in a transition neighborhoods may choose to transition to Little Harbor prior to the upcoming school year within the timeline determined by the superintendent. So this language was from the last meeting where it was the administration wants to have some agency in terms of defining when choice was going to happen. And so before that and leading up to that choice point, families each year will have an opportunity to transition to Little Harbor if they so choose in those transition neighborhoods. And then the transportation will be provided for, that was the last piece there, it's an important one, provided for in whatever school you're enrolled in the transition neighborhoods. So there's no expectation that if you choose one or the other, you'll have to provide your own transportation. So siblings who enroll in the upcoming school year who have a sibling currently enrolled in the elementary school in the district may choose to enroll in the current districted school. So this is just the language that codifies if you have, you don't have to split your family across schools.
This
Yeah.
is an important clarification from our redistricting meeting. So if I had a sixth grader in middle school who went to New Franklin, but I wanted my incoming K to go to New Franklin, that would not qualify for grandfathering.
Right.
Does that make sense? So if there is a divide, it would be, it's really about current elementary so that people aren't picking up at Little Harbor and New Franklin, that they're able to keep their siblings in elementary together, but.
Yeah, it's just because you're a legacy at one school doesn't, I guess we would put it. Right, and then so that sibling grandfathering tail it doesn't have a defined end, so that sibling sort of grandfathering can continue. And then, right, deadlines for decision, I guess is reiterated what was in the other paragraph, established by the superintendent for change in enrollment. And then, a neighborhood is considered no longer in transition if all the students are at Little Harbor. I think that's, so that's maybe we should stop there because I think that's an important thing to make sure we have understanding on. Yeah. Any questions? Yes. Pip?
Are you gonna leave?
I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a sibling question.
Yes.
So, trying to think of how to explain this, but it's a scenario. So are we using only the sort of eldest member of the family as the person who guides the grandfathering? In other words, let me see if I can explain this.
Yeah, 3 kids.
If you have a child who's in 5th grade now,
Mm-hmm.
and then a younger sibling comes in that same year,
Mm-hmm.
or it has already started,
Mm-hmm.
then the 5th grader's gone, but then you still have and maybe you don't even have a child yet, but by the time your youngest, or your previously youngest, your middle child now is in 5th grade, the younger child is now ready to start school. So is that person, is it sort of like, I mean, I think it sounds like there's no defined period, but I'm wondering if the child who's currently in the school is sort of the measure for when you can still bring kids in,
Yeah,
Or if
in
it's
the, in the income.
Forever for your family.
No, it's not forever for your family. The spirit of it is to ensure that we don't force families to have to be in two different elementary schools.
Yeah, I get the spirit
Yeah.
of it. So I think, then I think in my scenario, it would be true that we would allow that previously unborn child to go to.
Yes, yes, it previously,
If
yes, yeah.
if their
Okay.
sibling was in the elementary school when they were starting
You
in
had
the elementary.
kids 4 years apart.
Right, but it was the
every
sibling
year.
that was already grandfathered with the older kid. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So it's like
Yep.
multiple generations.
So it could be, yeah.
Okay.
What we'll
I
get,
just-
so
I don't-
let's,
Four
We're gonna,
years,
like,
4 years.
how is this gonna-
4 years.
That would be the longest.
Who's gonna keep track of this?
I mean,
We're gonna
I
have
think
Like,
what the
it's a
board
little-
will have to make a decision if that is a huge transportation cost or something like
Right.
that, there may be come a time, which in your scenario is like 9 years down the road or
It could
something.
be 12 years. 12 years. out.
12 years
Years
down
out.
the road. So
If there's one kid 12 years out, then are we doing a personal car to pick?
I
up?
think part
I'm
of
not
it,
joking when I say that. I mean, we have to make those types of decisions.
but I think,
Well, and I'm not joking about like who is gonna manage this and how
Yeah,
are we
no,
gonna.
we have to track it all. We have to track everybody.
Okay, so it sounds like,
Right, like, okay, when you choose that.
okay, all right, thank you.
More on the grandfathering transitioning.
I guess that was my question. I mean, is there any idea that like, I don't know, I just think it's kind of ridiculous to have it, like, we're looking at 10-year projections. I mean, with all the different building and whatnot, I mean, we don't even know what the world's gonna look like in 5 years, so I guess, I think for me, having a 10-year plan versus something like a 5-year plan, I guess if, I'm wondering if there's any way, if any consideration, I know this is what you're proposing, but is there any, is there an alternative to put a constraint on this of 5 years or something that would make the most sense for a child that's in kindergarten right now? So the, the unborn child is not, they have to go to a different school, like, but I get the point. You're gonna have one kid at Little Harbor. I mean, so would the resolution be that when child at school in kindergarten right now gets to 2nd or 3rd grade, they need to transition to Little Harbor and
I
then?
mean, there's a
then
few
done-
different, yeah, there's a few different ways you can approach that. We've done our best to listen to families, and the feedback from families is don't make the choice for me in terms of forcing me to be in two different elementary schools. And so that's where we are. But yes, that is the implication of that choice.
and I think that maybe that scenario is gonna apply to 2 families in all of Portsmouth. And the amount of time we have already spent on that, this is our best
Yeah.
proposal for what will satisfy, and it will be up to the superintendent to have those hard conversations of, okay, Johnny can go to New Franklin, but we can't bus. And that's long after I'm on the school board, and I hope that they'll all support our superintendent in having those hard conversations, so.
What is the response, I guess, or what is the explanation to those families that now by doing this, we're splitting up their neighborhoods? So, their friend across the street who has an older kid, now my kid is going to Little Harbor. I mean, I guess because they don't have a child, maybe my child doesn't start until, 26, 27. But
Yeah,
like,
there isn't a good answer. I think
Yeah.
it's a choice,
We have
right?
choice.
Yeah.
but they're
the-
not gonna have some of these folks aren't gonna have that choice.
Well,
unless they
everybody
have-
has a choice in this plan, but
Only
you-
this, only for a
If you have
year.
a sibling in the school.
if you have a sibling in the
Mhm.
school,
Yeah.
yeah. But but there's
You will.
like, the other option is not to do grandfathering. And I mean, I think this is the choice, right? You either you take away the choice from individual families in terms of not being able to stay in the specific school. Or you have this option. There isn't a panacea that solves all those cases.
Yeah, you can either keep the neighborhood together.
Yeah.
And remove choice from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Or you can provide choice and split the neighborhood until the tail of that choice comes to a close.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think that part of it becomes and there are some families that do want to have split children so that they're kindergartners with other kindergartners, and that's their choice. But I think what we had heard a little bit of is like, let's say you have someone starting in K in 2 years, that they may keep Johnny in New Franklin for 3 years, and when their sibling enrolls, they both move to Little Harbor. And that was, I mean, that is a big burden on administrators, like that, we're not, like, that's a lot of tracking and moving. And so that is why this like ability to change once a year announced by the superintendent, like, has been put in. But that's the express purpose. I mean, I understand it's really not popular with those that want all their, kids right there. I mean, I have 3 neighbors that go to 3 different private schools, and we're all the kids play together. I mean, in all of this, it's hardest for us as adults, and the kids figure it out. Like, they're gonna have school friends and they're gonna have neighborhood friends in my mind, and they'll do better than we will.
Is there any way to straddle the start time? I know we've played, like, the district has played with start times before, but to have a start time for Little Harbor or New Franklin vary by, 5-10 minutes or something like that, so that somebody could drop a child at one school and drop their other child if they want to go with their friends to the other school. Like, I don't, are all our elementary schools on the same time right now?
Yep.
Okay, because I know we've changed it every year. It's like 8:05, 8, like, I think that start time has changed every year, or can vary.
I would just say that's beyond the scope of redistricting, because there's way too many dynamics in school timings that I don't pretend to know. So I would leave that to administration to figure out as they decide start times, not the school board.
Any more on the grandfathering? But
Well, I have a thought on grandfathering, but I also just wanted to ask a question, which I planned on asking earlier, which is, I know that the sort of process here has been the committee is making a recommendation of a plan, and we are going to vote yes or no on that plan. So I'm cognizant of the fact that we're talking about other options, and I do have a thought to add to the grandfathering scenario, but if that's not what's happening tonight, then I just want to find out. So am I looking to either approve this plan as it's written, or are we considering any modifications to it?
I think if we make a motion to approve the plan, procedurally amendments could potentially be made. I don't, what we need to be cognizant of when those come up is that this plan has quite a bit behind it in terms of analysis. And so what would that mean is hard to answer in the time, right? That's, yeah.
I would add, though, that there's probably a 95% chance we've looked at whatever scenario you may bring up. So we might have something to say about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just
Well, then-
communication out to families and everything too. If there's gonna be changes.
Okay, well, my question is, in that discussion we were just having, I'm wondering if we moved out the net new family concept 1 year. So in other words, any kids who are going into kindergarten this coming fall would still have a choice.
Yeah, we had
Could still start at their existing school, and then we would start the following year, because I know it takes a lot of preparation to get your kid ready for kindergarten, and you might have already visited the school and be excited, getting them excited, and that's a hard change to make at that age.
We had talked about a grace year, especially when we, during the conversation with Atlantic Heights and Meadowbrook, because just trying to be responsive to the late add of those neighborhoods. But I think what it does, I think the downside of it is the speed of impact at New Franklin, right? Is sort of what you're probably pushing out a year potentially in terms of getting to 14 classes, right? So that would be my, and I don't know that, I mean, I think it does on the upside maybe offer some flexibility in that first year. I don't think it doesn't address like neighborhood splitting or.
I think it does
Yeah.
a little, though, because if your kid has a group of pre-K people that they hang out with, then they could all still, and some of them have siblings, some don't, then they could all still go to the same school. But I agree, this isn't gonna impact that many kids, so.
I think it also just, there's like the piece of the, rumor mill or what, how people are picking it, tours of each other, like just the requests and the things that are there are just things that we don't have that the district doesn't have capacity to do in my mind, like the administrators, I don't know, maybe. Joanne, do you wanna, could you comment? on
No.
this?
Nope, I think the plan reflects the feedback that you've been given by the
I think
administration.
that's true, is that part of this is, the further we get out, the less reliable, this is talking to some of the other projections we have, the less reliable our projections are, so the push it out another year starts to create more volatility in kind of the projections, and I think the decision process was, if we're gonna do this, we need to, at some point, we need to do it, and the goal, and I think the value judgment was, families that are not embedded into a school community right now, then this would be the appropriate time before that embedding truly happens in a real institutional way. Let's go ahead and start making those moves so we can eventually get to the point where we feel like we have, an equitable use of space, particularly around New Franklin and what's available for those services. So.
Liz, did you have?
Yeah, a little bit. But it's not on the, it's kind of a side thing. I know we had sent out a special notification about the Atlantic Heights and Meadowbrook Coakley families. But we didn't send out a notification to Lafayette Park, Hillside, Powderhouse. I think those neighborhoods have obviously been flagged by their neighbors to be here and participate. But I guess, to see a plan that didn't include Atlantic Heights or Meadowbrook after we sort of really kind of gave the notification to them.
So-
I'm just a little bit confused with that, but we can talk about that after. I just kind of.
Well, that was a response to a
No,
board request.
I mean, I appreciate that, and I think the families have been understanding, so I totally get we put panic in them and then
Well,
we took
I
it
don't
back,
think it's
but
so much about the panic. I think my concern is that it should have been notification to Lafayette Park, Hillside, Powderhouse, the neighborhoods that are all
Yeah,
being
we can't-
affected and not just one notification to a couple. But
we can't go back.
Yeah, okay,
on that.
let's,
I guess I had a question about New Franklin. I know we did a tour of the elementary schools and, there's space concerns and whatnot. And with all this grandfathering, like, it doesn't seem like there's gonna be any change this year, next year,
So the only thing I can say to that is to root yourself in the spreadsheet of the projection, right? Which shows that in starting next year, we're very confident that there will remain 15 sections at New Franklin, and that in 3 years, we likely get to 14. And I think you can take issue with the projection and like the methodology of the projection, but based on what we sort of came to, we think there's an immediate impact in terms of making sure we don't go back to 16 classrooms. And then in 3 years, getting to a point where we likely have 14. That is the analysis of the co-chairs of this committee, of the redistricting committee. Yeah.
And so I brought it out here. So I think that the piece of, class sections, is over here. Can you see? See why I went to the PowerPoint? Now it's just too big. Oh, gosh. Okay,
better.
so, I think this begins next year, 25, 26. But we would anticipate if these numbers, again, with what Byron said, there's error in here. So it's somewhere between that top bar and the lower bar on the graph, but our real concern with K enrollment next year at New Franklin is that they will need to go to 16 sections. So we hope that this little decrease gets there and shifting in class sizes or whatever, but that's part of the importance of having K transition, having new to the
Net new.
net new families have that transition, because we're pretty sure you can get there if that happens, not so much if that's a choice point for folks.
And that just, I know everyone in this crowd knows, but the tipping point on that is the difference between the room that is used for 10 different purposes, the suite right now, and whether that's available or that goes back to utilization for another classroom. Which has a huge, big impact on lots of different activities at New Franklin School.
And then the converse of that would be, yeah, we could have sooner impact by forcing everyone to move, which means forced transition, no family choice, like those, that's the other side of, that would be the option to do that.
Do we have any arguments for, I mean, I understand, like, we've had this, we wanted to hear from the community. But we're also, I think, in a position that we have to make a tough decision that's gonna benefit, like, I mean, we want to benefit our community and the community folks, but if we're in another position where the city council is like, hey, you're having to put trailers outside of New Franklin because we need another classroom, like, and we just went through this whole redistricting process and upheaval and everything else, and now the city council is gonna come back and be like, what the heck? So that's where my confusion continues to come in, and I brought it up this whole time about units at Dondero, units at New Franklin. Like, I think those are some of the things that we need to be looking at. And so I guess I understand that you guys are probably frustrated with me throwing this out there, but I'm concerned.
I just think that it's resolved. I don't think I don't think I don't think we're gonna see the need for units at New Franklin or Dondero because this plan addresses those things. So I think this plan specifically addresses that concern.
I also think they're modular classrooms and they're the nicest classrooms in our district.
Yeah, I think we
So,
should have
I
some if
think-
we need them, my concern though is that if the suite is already super compact with, space and whatnot, and we're gonna get rid of that, like, I think.
We're saying we're not getting rid of
But
it.
I guess I worry that,
Well,
such a
we don't
small
worry.
transition,
Well, and that's and that's, again, it goes back to the weighing of those principles. They're all good things, all things we want. And they were prioritized in different ways. So if we wanted the least variability with the quickest outcomes that included the reorganization of space, the very similar demographic makeup of stuff, we would remove choice and we'd move everybody next year based on the snapshot we have right now. And we would break up neighborhoods, we'd remove choice, and we'd hit those other goals because we would have prioritized those other goods at a higher rate. Ultimately, parent choice and grandfathering became a big component. And so we try to balance all of those things over time. But it's not because there's just an alternative set of choices. And as a member, you can make a decision that you want to vote against this plan because you'd rather have us not offer choice and make the move quicker and make the move based on the snapshot that we have right now. And that would be reasonable. It's just based on a different set of value judgments.
I don't think that we're not given those options. We're given, let's vote on this plan, or it's this plan or no plan is the options that I'm seeing. So that's why I'm concerned is that, we're in a vicious budget cycle, let's be honest. And, if we're asked to get rid of the units on Dondero and, we might, how is that going to create a shift? And then again, the concern that we're going to be right back here next year, that we don't want to have to do that again. So,
Okay, I think we've heard the concerns though, and I think we should move on. So I do but I guess a good segue into that we do want to invest in New Franklin. It is the goal of this plan to make sure that we have that 15th or the 16th classroom that continues to be available and move to we have the 2 classrooms that we can then use. Not part of this redistricting plan, but definitely the goal of the redistricting plan is to allow the CIP funds for New Franklin in the next 2 cycles, ideally to be prioritized around those spaces. But I understand that is, that's a discussion with administration. That's not the purview of the redistricting committee. I think it's definitely our hope and our recommendation that's what follows. Right, so the conclusions and the recommendations is that we adopt the transition neighborhood plan. We follow that by prioritizing investment in New Franklin School, and then we continue to monitor the enrollment trends. I think the data visualization tools that we've put together offer some help, we can do better. We can, I think a lot of the commentary around socioeconomic analysis, I think, is a deep process that would take months, if not a year, to come up with a model that's probably gives us the kind of information that we want. I think that is something I think I on the housing committee discussing with some of the housing committee members who are in the development space around, when you come up with a pro forma for a building that's, 300 units and it's tens of millions of dollars, what are the actuarial tables and the demographics you're expecting in that building? Like, I can't imagine that when those buildings go up, that those sorts of analysis aren't done, that they don't know what the demographics that they're expecting to move into those buildings are. And I think it's would be, if we can find a way to get at that information, I think that is another thing that could be done in conjunction with the city. So I think there's a lot of continued data work that can be done on those two things. Additionally, I think the school district itself should maintain back-looking records of enrollment trends per neighborhood. We should know when neighborhoods are we can know this. We can start tracking the data now, and we can know when neighborhoods are turning over. We can know what the trends are on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. And I think we can get a really strong picture of like what the census is in the district. And that's something that I think is that comes out of my work in this committee, is there's definitely more information, and those are some of the things. And I could talk at length as some of the more information that we could have had. And I think the community input has been very strong on this in terms of where other places we could have looked. And I think there's a lot of really good information and questions there. Yeah. And then I guess the next slide here is just that I think this committee, right, as new developments come online, this was a previous strategy. I think it's a valid strategy after this larger move, which is continue to monitor the big developments, Yokins, Christmas tree shops, the Christ Church, Episcopal Church, iHeartRadio, et cetera. And if there's, in conversation, ideally in conversation with those developers, we understand demographics, we can make recommendations on those developments and where they would go. And lastly, I did my best to tie, the original principles of the plan to what has been decided in the plan, and then lastly into the strategic plan as well around equitable space tying to K-12 curriculum, making sure that we're building educator capacity, and then student safety, well-being, and belonging, where I think some of the focus areas from the strategic plan that mapped to this direction. So I think that's sort of the conclusion of the report. Carrie, do you have the map up? Do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to put a couple clarifications on the map. So we've talked almost completely about these three neighborhoods. Just a couple notes of what I think we're also voting on this proposed map. A few of the changes that Byron made based on what we know is coming is to separate urban forestry out because of the church development. So that so as units come online, if they get through their legal struggles, we have that to specifically monitor, so it's not lumped in with others. Similarly, Greenleaf, which includes the Yokins development. And then there is one other little shift that prior Peverly West had been districted to Little Harbor. There are no currently enrolled students there.
Not that I'm aware of.
That we have been able to locate. And there was a request that because of their proximity, there's like one family that requested that they wanted to be in Dondero, and that we anticipate very low numbers from that area, and it makes more sense logistically.
I just wanted to call out one change.
Sorry, can we make that change tonight into our plan?
It's in there.
It's here.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's implied from the map, but We can, we
Okay,
can, we
but
can,
yeah.
we can spell it out.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
map is code, like,
Yeah.
so it would be like imported, I
Yeah.
guess.
But yeah, but so if we're, okay.
I do want to call out one non-change change. So if you if you zoom in on Oxford, which is to the left of Powder House, previously Oxford had been drawn without that notch. There's no students in the notch currently. But I did update that to make sure it's accurate
This
with the
notch.
current, what is on the city website for the current. So there's no intention of somehow changing that notch. Is because that was, so non-change in terms of the overall district, changed to what was previously drawn.
Isn't that the cemetery?
No, there's 3 little roads right there. That is next to the cemetery, but
The cemetery's here?
cemetery is there.
Is it
and
Griffin?
It's
Oh, yeah.
it's actually Oxford, I think. Yeah.
Why? Oh, okay. Can I ask, do you know offhand how many students we have from Oxford right now?
It's around 10. I can pull it up.
And then regarding the urban forestry, with that new development in mind, I'm curious why you didn't divide that and send the new development to Little Harbor. as opposed-
Because of the legal action right now and the delay in that being built, we don't know what that's going to do. So where there's no current enrollments or plan for enrollments, the thought was to put it there within monitoring, in order to decide as it came about, as the project developed. But I think some of what we have learned in looking at developments is some of what is proposed and even approved never happens. And some of what is approved happens quickly. And so we want to be as like nimble as we can. If suddenly, Christmas tree shops is built next year, we deal with that as in the
I
best.
think a decision point should be like when a project is breaking ground. I think that's probably because it takes at least a year from that point
Yeah.
on. Up until that, I think there's so much variance in the process. Yeah,
So right now that's where it currently existed. And it's not changed.
correct. Yeah.
I guess I just want to make a point to that. I think we do need to catch though the fact that people may move to a property because they think their kid's going to a certain school. So if there is a new property being built, I think we need to make a decision before people start moving in or, investing, putting money into the property. If they're thinking, I'm putting my money, I don't know, but
I don't
people
think
still
I'm gonna-
do,
yeah.
regardless of our schools.
I don't think we
They
should.
still do.
Yeah, I don't think we should make decisions to appease like developers pro formas, like in terms of.
I'm not saying
Yeah, yeah.
performance, but I think we've heard from the community that like people buy property because, maybe they went to New Franklin School and they want their kid to go
I
there,
think, yeah, I think once they break ground, I think we can make that call. I think that's it. Yeah.
Although sometimes people do invest before they break ground.
Yeah.
Well,
I-
I'm talking about like the big, I see what you're saying. People are buying units
Yeah.
before, well,
Yeah.
maybe.
I guess
Maybe
with that said, I think
different time.
I guess my only suggestion would, out of everything that you've given here, would be to, as far as the committee, you said an ad hoc committee, I again want to emphasize, I'd like that to be a standing committee of the board that, meets on a certain, biannual or whatever you need to do basis to touch base so that there's a constant checkpoint built into our schedule so that when the board changes over or the superintendent changes over, God forbid, gets sick of us, then, there'll be some sort of checkpoint. We're not gonna lose that there.
I think we agree with that. We talked about like mid-October as being a time because there is a state report filed October 1st with enrollment data as a good thing, but that is not in the scope of this vote on our plan.
Oxford has 8.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Sorry, just another brief one. Is there and this is a weird question, but I think we had talked about, and I don't think we need to with the grandfathering, but we had talked about like care packages for families that might want to transition their child who's at New Franklin now to Little Harbor, like a t-shirt or something like that. But with that said, I think that's a little, it's comforting, but it's not exactly what I'm getting at here. Was there any discussion about incentivizing transitions? Like, I don't know, obviously we can't like pay somebody to
There
move, but
wasn't-
like, is there?
There wa- I would say-
Yeah, no,
but I would say in-
is there like,
in
is there
that
any
vein-
thought of like, what would be an incentive?
I would just say in that vein, we talked,
Transition?
we did not talk about incentivizing decision making. We did, I mean, we have talked,
For PTSY.
we have talked throughout about the fact that as administration, we would be working carefully about how do we welcome new families into Little Harbor and how do we help families transition out? And, the plan gets passed and we get into like all that implementation work and what does that look like? But we know, there's work that we would need to do around that stuff, but we don't have a swag bag to try to. I know that's not what you're saying.
Families that are, maybe, I don't know if there are families that are teetering on the question of whether do I start my kid here or start not, and it, we're not talking about, what are we talking about? How many families here in total? It's, we're talking right now 40, 50, close to 100 kids, but I mean, our principals, 30 to 40 at a school, could there be potential outreach or whatnot if people are teetering on the, should I go here, or should I go there? Because obviously we would prefer that they go over to Little Harbor if that's the ultimate transition.
the
So that's the
expectation-
only thing I wanted to throw out
Yeah,
there.
I think the expectation, and I think the administration is definitely going to follow through in terms of making sure that families like have opportunities to see the school or answer any questions. Total confidence in the administration to answer any of those questions. Yeah.
Phil's gonna be in charge of that.
So I like.
No connection.
National Signing Day. We'll have it.
This conversation does remind me a bit though of this one thing that has come up previously that I don't feel like has been addressed, which is the after school care at schools and sort of the inequities that are built in there, particularly that some of them in the Little Harbor area tend to be more expensive than the ones that people might be used to at New Franklin. So what can we do to address that? I know that's not part of this plan, but I'm afraid we need to give it some attention because that's going to be a change for families.
I think it's, again, not something that we can make a decision on. It is a challenge for folks. It may drive some of their decisions immediately, but we would expect that our superintendent would be communicating with aftercare providers in order to communicate that either additional spots are going to be needed or when those enrollment trends come in. But that is, I think, beyond the scope. I think too, there's probably going to be some change. I think part of the reason we can't base everything on it is MC3 is at New Franklin is grant funded. It's not I'd love for it to be guaranteed and forever, but it isn't. There's also a big push for rec to have more programming and busing to community campus. So the landscape of, after school programming may change drastically in the next 2 to 3 years anyway. So that
Well, the busing to community campus, I think, is something we should consider in terms of our, I guess if that's rec doing that, then maybe it's not about deterring.
We've had conversations with the city. I think ultimately one way or the other, Rex already put out information about the fact that that is not necessarily our transportation.
Yeah.
So it depends on what our capability is going to be post this dialogue and how much these decisions will just strain on our existing kind of transportation system. We're always we're in those conversations with Rec around how do we give as many families as possible as much access to as many choices in after school programming, while also being conscious of we have an existing partnership with Seacoast Community School for the PEAK program at 2 of our schools. We want them to be thriving at the same time, and if they're not, then those programs could go away, and those are not programs that we run. They're partners with us, so it's a fickle landscape, and we're trying to balance kind of those big 3 right now. MC3, which is connected to a 21st Century Learning Grant, Seacoast Community School and the PEAK program, and then Rec wanting to become more part of that scene through community campus, and trying to balance all those folks at the same time and making sure that as we think about that balance, we're doing it always with the idea of how are we contributing to maximizing the number of choices for families at the cheapest rate we can, while not necessarily being in a position to take over that after school programming as a district at the same time. So,
Brian.
Well, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the redistricting committee's adoption of the transition neighborhood plan.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Liz.
Can we amend the motion to add the neighborhoods that that are being shown on the map that we're now changing? Was it the Oxford neighborhood? Or
Yeah,
no, not
do you,
Oxford.
it's the Beverly West. So do you move to add Beverly West to the written plan?
Is that the only?
It's the only one.
Okay,
You're talking
Um,
about Parsons Woods,
Yes.
correct?
okay, does that make sense, right, of where we're going?
I think it's an approval of the map as part of the motion. Because urban forestry wasn't on the prior one either, because there's no kids there.
So I guess,
So urban, well, I just want urban forestry, the way it's currently drawn in the city website, looks to me, if I'm remembering correctly, like it's Dondero.
I believe
Yeah.
you're correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think the map is accurate in that regard. So I think the only
Maybe
change,
it's the Yokens one that
I think the only change is Parsons Woods.
So the amendment is that the Parsons Woods neighborhood is going to Little Harbor, correct?
Yes.
hold on, wait, I
No.
thought it
Oh,
was
I'm
going to
sorry, it's
Dondero.
Dondero, yeah, yeah. Dondero.
It's called Beverly West on the map, just.
That's
Yeah,
the
it's called
entire,
Beverly
yeah, that's,
Beverly-
and the entire area on the map is Beverly West. Parsons Woods is smaller than that, but it's in there.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I think we need to be clear though, because people are gonna be changing like realtor sites, I assume, for these properties and stuff too, so. Just to be clear, Beverly West and Parsons Woods, and so I motion to amend. The motion on the table or add a friendly amendment. To add Beverly West and Parsons Woods, as well as to adopt the. The new district map as proposed by the redistricting committee.
okay, good. Do
Sounds
we have a
good to
second
me.
for that?
I'll second.
Okay.
And then I think whoever made the motion has to.
I agree.
Okay.
You're the second.
Okay. Okay, is there any discussion
Yes.
okay,
On that,
Any-
on that,
on the amendment?
on the amendment. Yeah,
Is there any discussion on the original motion? Because it's a friendly amendment, so it goes with the motion, correct?
I think we need to vote to,
I need to vote on the
need
amendment.
to
if
vote
there's
on the
no
amendment.
Further discussion.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
on
if
the
there's no
amendment.
further discussion, let's vote on the friendly amendment.
roll call with Tisha.
Liz Barrett,
Yes.
Tish Campbell,
Yes.
Nancy Claiberg.
Yes.
Pip Clues,
Yes.
Brian French,
Yes.
Byron Matto,
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes.
8-0.
Okay, thank you, Liz.
Okay, let's go back to the original motion.
I think Lisa,
Oh, is there any
Not
discussion?
interrupt you.
oh, please.
So I think I had one clarifying question, a couple of comments, and then one other question, but I'll try to be as quick as I can. It looked like the timeline for if this passes tonight, we envision putting information out by February with a decision deadline in April this year.
We had discussed, we did, that wasn't a.
Those dates were on there, so I
That was,
just wanted
so
to be
we
clear
had a,
about-
yeah, so in our last meeting, we discussed a couple of different concepts. I think we, at one point, you know, we had like a July, there was I think we had like a July 1 date flying around about,
Wow.
and WOW is the,
Sorry.
WOW is,
What?
watch principals react to that. It's like, whoa. So we had talked about really our desire, you know, in a lot of ways is to, once we get through year one, I think we want to get into a situation, ideally it'd be great if it was, or even just in advance of budget season. So then
Right.
we're like, we know what's happening next year at these schools. So, so even if it was like you know, December, somewhere in the late fall, you know, kind of winter time, so that we had the ability to build that into having a thoughtful budget proposal reflective of what we thought our enrollment was going to be.
And I think you said that for
So-
future years, and that makes sense, but for right now, we passed this and it's impacting.
We had
what we're gonna
hypothetically,
do.
I had hypothetically thrown out with no, I think it ended up being typed up, but I said, well, what about
It says
after April?
example.
After April, and we had it as an example. It was after April break,
Okay.
being in a position where
Yeah.
we would ask families to be, commit to a decision.
Just
So,
for this year. and then you'd move
for
it
the fall
forward
of,
in
the
future
fall of
years.
25.
Okay,
And
thank
then
you.
in the future, we would move that up so it could be part of, and I know you'd asked before about budgeting. It's like, we want to include
Well, and
include those things in budget.
staffing and.
Absolutely. Yeah.
all of that.
What do we think the needs are of our student populations in each of those buildings? Yeah.
Okay, and then I think I have one question that I just want to preface by saying, like, I truly appreciate like all of the work that everybody on the committee has put into this. I know I've been kind of voicing a lot of concerns about the process, mainly in terms of just what I feel like hasn't been totally great communication to families. So I'm hoping that as we're going forward, we can really look more closely at that piece. And I think the one thing that is like, I'm still sort of struggling with a little bit is fully respecting that all of our administrators are in a tough position to have to vote on this, and trying to balance that. For me personally, it's a little tough to want to back a plan that I don't know is fully supported by, you know, the people that have to go out and do the work to implement it. But it sounds like from what I'm hearing that you feel like this achieves the objectives that you want it to achieve, even if you wish we didn't have to be in this position to be moving families. If I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I guess I wanted to make sure that I'm not passing something that you feel like it's obviously going to be disruptive, and I don't want it to be disruptive and then not achieve the goals that we want it to achieve. And so I guess that's sort of, if we feel like our top goal is addressing space and spreading people out in the right way, do you feel like this at least gets us to that goal?
I think that's safe to say for the administrators.
I
And that it's a
mean,
very uncomfortable spot
I know.
to speak about
know.
removing particular families.
Of course it
And I'm
is.
speaking because I get them all.
Right.
Um,
I know. But-
So that was the reason that administrators abstained
And I
from voting.
totally respect that.
But there was the feeling that this did meet the objectives of it.
And I appreciate you taking the time to say that. I know it's a really tough, nobody wants to be in a position of saying, yes, we'd love families to leave our school. Like, that's a terrible thing to have to say, and that's not what anybody wants. What we want is for kids to have the right space and the right, you know, equitable access to services. And I respect that. So I appreciate that. I think I definitely agree with Pip that we do have, if we're thinking about equity, some inequitable costs and access to after school, to enrichment, to, you know, like all sorts of things across the district. I've been a broken record for years going, why do we rely on PTAs to fund buses for field trips? Or why are we relying on fundraising outside of our budget to provide a lot of enrichment to our kids? And I do worry with this rebalancing of our school communities that at least in the short term, we may not have the same ability to rely on our families in all of these schools. Like, they'll come together, but it might take a few years to kind of reconstitute that. And I know it's a hard budget cycle, but I think we really need to take some leadership as a district to really provide that enrichment to kids equitably across the schools without relying so heavily on all of the families to fundraise. Because it's going to be hard. I've done that work in many schools in this district and other districts. It's hard every year. It's going to be really hard for the next several years. So I just want to voice that. And I think having rec take a larger involvement in after school, we always have waiting lists. So it's like really important to have all of these programs, but there's never enough space for everybody who wants childcare and needs to work after 3 o'clock. I mean, so I just want to voice that. And I hope that the communication going forward can go out like much more like aggressively. Because I'm still hearing from people who are like, what's happening? And you can send a million emails and people won't read them. And that's not your fault. But it just feels like in this case, if we have to call people or we have to put something in the old snail mail and find the Portsmouth post office again, it just feels like we should go that extra beat, because that extra burden on us, if that takes a burden away from a family, that's something that I want to advocate for. That's.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Liz.
Liz.
Couple questions. I think you spoke to this question of Lisa's about a timeline for the coming year. I guess I'm wondering, you know, when you're thinking about, because I'm still thinking about incentivizing a little bit. Because I mean, if we need the move, we need the move. So here's what I was thinking, and I guess I'm wondering about is you're given a timeline and you're saying, hey, families, you got to make a decision by this amount of time before school starts, right? Well, what if you have a kid that's like, all of a sudden, you know, they find out their buddy, you know, the timeline's passed, right? They find out their buddy's going to Little Harbor. And they reach out to you in August, you know, 3 weeks before school starts and says, hey, Is there any opportunity? I mean, could there, if we really want families to go to Little Harbor and kind of move this along, then I think, you know, we don't want to be like, hey, yeah, by the way, there's this little side deadline, like you don't have to do the first deadline.
You feel my blood pressure.
Well, I was gonna say
Sorry.
that. And that's why, and I think the dynamic I'm worried about is exactly what you just said, which is there's really two deadlines. There's the deadline that says I'm gonna stay at my existing school. And then there's the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You can stretch it out until August 1st and still go to Little Harbor deadline. And I
Yeah.
don't want to get in that scenario.
I understand that. I guess I just wonder, like, given that, I mean, it's 100 families, right? A little less than 100.
100 students. 90
100 students.
students.
Yeah, so I guess I just wonder, what I don't see in here is the reiteration that's in our school board policy that the superintendent, like on a case by case basis, can make determinations. And so I guess I just, knowing that we want to move folks to Little Harbor, I guess is there an idea that, or I guess I'd like to know that the superintendent would still exercise his ability to make case by case determinations should somebody that told you in, you know, whenever you put the deadline that they want to stay at their school, should they change their mind? Because I do feel like ultimately that would be in the best interest, despite the fact that it kind of gives you last minute transitions, it would be in the best interest overall to get that family so they don't pop on another kid and then you're, you know, so you know what I'm saying? Like that's where we're, yeah.
I get what you're saying. I think I would lean, so I think the conversation, I think some of the conversation we've had in the past is.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Phil.
No, I think the conversation throughout has been, once you pass the plan, that as administrators, we will implement it in all the different ways. We have judgments we have to make about a variety of different things. I would say that I think that in that scenario, the gaining of one or two families earlier after a deadline is outweighed by creating a cultural expectation that there's a secondary deadline for people who want option B and you can hedge. I think that would be more problematic for us as a system than anything we would gain from one or two families who would do late moves. So my inclination, just in terms of you being able to predict by judgment, would be that it would still be just what it is today, few and far between in terms of the number of folks that we would make exceptions for outside of that deadline.
Yeah, I guess I just want to emphasize that we still have a school board policy that for case by case determination and hope that the superintendent would exercise that should a family want to move to Little Harbor. I do want to say thank you to Byron, Carrie for all the time. I know I've been kind of a hard ass, but I do have a lot of frustrations with this whole thing. And again, I did ask for motions to be put on the agenda back in 2023. I asked to be heard and have the minutes corrected in 2022, and they weren't, to some extent, as far as including where my thoughts are about NESDEC and redistricting. And I hope that I guess I also have frustration of how we are communicating, you know, scheduling a meeting and then posting it to the community, you know, giving them only a week's notice. So I hope that, you know, going forward, you know, if we establish, you know, I guess I asked Nancy to put on the agenda for the next meeting, a motion under my name to make the redistricting committee a standing committee. I know we're talking about committees, I think, at the next meeting too. So I'd ask that it be a standing committee so that we have constant checkpoints and we can have these conversations within committee when there are changes, and we could take it seriously and address the, you know, the growing needs. The growing needs aren't just the numbers that NESDECs are giving, you know, their IEPs, their 504s, their spaces for OT, PT, all of these things. So I think, you know, we need to do better for our community and our kids. And I just honestly, I'm just frustrated. I wish people would take me a little more seriously sometimes when I bring up these issues, and not sort of push it. But I think this was pushed back for a long time, and the process was flawed. But I do, with all of that said, I do want to express my utmost gratitude to Carrie and Byron for the time they put in, and the hairs that have probably been pulled out, and the, you know, public, you know, like you've taken everything in, and you've really really made a thoughtful plan, and I do appreciate that. And so thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
I guess since
since Liz just was speaking to this, I will say, as you all know, I too have had some real reservations about the process. And I'm not gonna reiterate all those, but I hope that we can do better with communicating with the public in the future, because I think this started out really hard, and I'm glad we've gotten to a point where people feel like they've been heard now and their communication or their perspectives have been taken into account. So I also appreciate that you guys took the time to do that and worked it into the plan. I think also going forward, I was intrigued by this Rule 14, which I did look up. And it made me think about the fact that we should be kind of more cognizant going forward about our committee's structure, because interestingly, you two are the only ones on the board who have kids in elementary school. So,
Have kids in elementary
oh,
school.
you don't?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your kids in middle school now.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot. So then maybe that doesn't apply, but I think it is something to be aware of in the future. And I think there's a very fine line in terms of how our individual kids are impacted, because I too have a kid in school, and you know, if we change a policy, it might impact him. So I don't know what, I think we need to consider that when we look at our rules. I know the rules are on are coming up, but I think it would be worth sort of thinking about and looking at, and whether that's even realistic for us to live up to. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just absolutely object to that being a case in this. There's been, I mean, I think the board, it's up to board members to recuse themselves for votes that they have a personal stake in some way. If that is not if the board would like to vote that I may not vote on redistricting, that is up to the board. But to call it out as in the way that I just heard described makes it feel like I'm the only person targeted in that. And it's such a frustrating disservice to this process to me, because there is at no time been me vying for my child in this process.
I'm sorry,
And
I
so-
did not mean to imply that at all. I don't think that's the case, but it could be perceived that way by someone, like by the community. So I'm just saying we should be cautious of that as we, you know, choose committees. Like,
Well, that, I'm just sorry.
I'm not suggesting that
But
you shouldn't vote at all.
I would maintain though, that it is up to, if I have a vested stake in whatever roofing construction, and that I'm the contractor for
Yeah.
New Franklin's replacement, like, yeah, I need to recuse myself. But like having a kid in elementary school, absolutely not. I think that's absurd. Unless you're,
Well, if you were in one of the I don't even know where you live, but if you were in one of the neighborhoods that was
Still.
being moved,
board members
It
have
could-
to go between looking at the big picture and their own experiences in the district. And if that's, I mean, all of us are affected by this, because we all have people we know that are affected by this.
that's
And-
that's
and-
exactly what I'm pointing out, that I think we need to revisit that rule to see if it's really realistic.
Too broad, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I
can take
know,
that.
I am in no way
I can
calling
take
you.
that
out
and
there.
calm down.
Yeah, no, I don't, like, literally, I don't even know if you're impacted at all, but in theory, you could have, you know, decided that you really wanted your neighborhood to move, or, you know, be.
Well, I'll give
be
an
drawn.
example. I mean,
Something.
when I was
But
on the
I-
committee
I-
before, there was several there were several Little Harbor. There was me, Anne, and several, and Pip and Hope, and I believe both their kids went to Little Harbor. So in my opinion, I don't really know if it's true or not, but I guess I had a sense that like, hey, maybe they, you know, didn't want any changes to happen or something like
I
that,
think
you know?
this is not-
Yeah,
it's
it's
not-
not-
yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
something that we think
I
about.
just want to say,
No,
you
I know.
actually shared with me that
Yes.
when years ago, the
Right.
people on the redistricting committee didn't allow their own committees, or
that- the-
neighborhoods to move.
right,
So
right.
I don't think it's like unrealistic, but I'm not suggesting that's an issue here. I'm just saying in the future, that's something, it's an interesting point to pay attention to.
And we can discuss it when we discuss our rules. You know,
Yeah, that's what I'm
we are gonna review our rules, so we can discuss that at that time.
And I would just say the code of ethics stuff you got from the ordinances tonight in some ways lays out a framework for specifically what is a conflict of interest, right? When does it rise to the level where the municipality includes the chartered boards and commissions? It would say, it defines it and says, this is when you've hit a point where you should not engage. So.
Okay,
I have
Lisa.
one other thing to say about the rules, and about this one, I'd say, I think probably what we have, you and Tish are the only two people who don't have school kids, so. I mean, we get a slippery slope of that, but I do think if we need to word that rule a little better, maybe we do. And I think along with that, like, I think we might want to think about just our rules for forming committees, because from my perspective, like, a lot of the mismatch between my anticipation for the process and what others have felt should be the process, I think could be clarified by us voting as a board for when we form the committee, what is the intention of how it's going to operate, and what is the intention for how they are going to vote and move things forward to the board. Because I think I could have maybe not been a squeaky wheel about a lot of things if we'd agreed as a group ahead of time that there was a process that we were going to follow for all of our committees. And we don't have that right now. Like, all of the committees operate in a lot of different ways. And I think that lack of consistency can lead to tension points that
I
we
just
want
want to say,
avoid.
I just want to say, I hear you. I think we're a little bit adrift from where we need to be right now.
I'd like to move the question.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
one more question about the plan.
More questions. Liz, what is your question?
I'm guessing, as far as what we motioned for, are we adopting the transition neighborhood proposal that's laid out right here? And if that, and I assume that's the case, because that's what I would hope for. I guess, I'm wondering if, you know, when we do, if this is what we're adopting and we're pushing out to the, I think it's already been sent out to community, but if this is what we're adopting and it's going to be publicized, that this is what we've adopted, I would suggest defining the words net new in the language here. And, you know, so I guess I wonder if maybe, I don't think there's much cleanup. I do see a couple periods that need to go in there, and there's two twos in section 2, and in the first sentence there. But I guess the net new, I think, needs to be defined a little bit further so that there's not confusion with people. Like, what is, you know, what does that mean?
Does the
to-
administration understand the meaning of net new?
I understand administrative, but what about community members?
The communication out to the community is up to administration. It's not necessarily this verbiage. We're not writing the letter to families.
Okay, I guess I just wanted to be clear about like what we are, I know we're voting on this in this plan, but if we're voting on it and this is what's being published out, I just wanted to add that clarifying piece to this.
If it passes, my intent would be that very shortly we would, you know, we would do some electronic communication around, here is the thing that was just passed. And we'll be getting back to you soon with additional information about how we're going to implement it. Who are the people that need to be, you know, what are the neighborhoods? Here are the addresses. We talked about that. What are the decisions, you know, who qualifies? What are the decisions you need to make? What's the date by which you need to do them? All these, what do our transition plans look like? All those types of things would be things that we would be getting back to the public on after we have an opportunity to sit down and create them.
And we're not offering, I just want to be clear too, we're not offering, it says 3 identified neighborhoods, but we just amended to have 4, but we're not offering a transition plan to Beverly West.
So I added to, I didn't add in the transition area. In the conclusions and recommendations, I added number 4, which is Parsons Wood will be redistricted to Don Darrow as defined in the map. And it was not part of the transition program. So that should get us out of that logical quandary.
Okay, Pip.
What is the process if this plan doesn't pass? Because I've heard that these two have said they're done after this because they're tired of it. So what happens if it doesn't pass?
Speak of vote. Why do we vote?
First and find out.
Before I vote, I want to know I want to understand what the answer is.
I will say my recommendation on the answer is that we get a consultant and we put it in the budget process and we move that forward, and no changes are made for the upcoming year, which will be very disappointing to many families who have been reaching out for 2 to 3 years. Many families don't want to move, but there are some that are ready to go. And it will be another year or 2 before the consultant's work is done.
Okay. So how is that what you two would?
It's mostly, I mean, there's the two scenarios of that or nothing. And then we wait until things change on the ground that force quicker action.
Okay,
So
so
those would be the two. I
so
think those are the two
there would be no changing to this plan. like taking it and revising it. It's this or nothing.
Well, do you want to
No, you can
revise it
amend,
now?
we can amend, we can make amendments. I mean, you can,
I
you
don't
can
know.
propose amendments.
Revise it now, but I just don't feel like I understand it well enough yet to vote, so I can.
Okay, let's move the question. Patty?
Voting to adopt the recommendations of the committee with the addition of Parsons Woods redistricting to Dondero as defined on the map and adopting the map. Roll call vote. Liz Barrett,
Can you come back to me?
No. You can,
All
you
right,
can.
thank you.
Tish Campbell,
Yes.
Nancy Clayberg,
Yes.
Pip Clues,
Abstain.
Brian French,
Yes.
Byron Maddow,
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes.
Liz Barrett,
Yes.
7-0, the vote passes
One
with
abstention.
one abstention, yep.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a long process and it's concluded.
Thank you, Nancy.
Well,
And thank you, everyone,
you.
and the community as well.
May I speak?
Principals go.
yes, you may speak. You-
Principals go home.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was actually going to point out that the board voted to have the principals present. And I do not believe that this was time well spent for their 3 hours at the end of a very long day. And so I just want us as a board to be more cognizant of that. And I understand the intention, but I don't think that's how this played out. So thank you very much for that. My other part that I would like to just conclude with is that I think in all of this process, my biggest frustration is not families that are being affected, not administrators, it's the board. And the board has been absolutely focused on this process piece without ever defining what it is. So I appreciate Lisa's point that there should be expectations, but for constant distrust of this process to be perpetuated by the board is so insulting to all of my being. The fact that video recordings were demanded, meetings, minutes that were transcripts were demanded is not an expectation of any other committee on this. So if you want to establish rules and we want to put funding into having everything professionally recorded, then the board, someone needs to make a motion. But all of this did, in my opinion, is silence the voices of people who had concerns, who we were able to get through the noise and listen to. And I hope that even though there is not, I know that not everyone is happy, that the board can take this as a lesson learned to like be kinder to folks taking on the process and like actually lean into what affected people are saying as opposed to process points that no one's looking for, that the details of minutes being constantly criticized is just really hard for me to take when it as we've said in the past, like there's been little conversation about the plan. And I'm sad that you don't feel like you understand the plan, but I just think that we've spent a lot of bandwidth on critiquing the process and not actually talking about the plan. I'm glad we got to do that tonight. I wish it had happened much, much sooner.
Thank you.
I
Lisa.
would like to respond to that because I think first of all, I made a motion which passed by a majority of this board to have the principals here. I tried to be judicious with what questions I asked. And if I was not able to ask that question, I don't feel that I would have been in a position to vote. Because there was no way for me to attend any committee meeting where I could personally ask any questions. And I understand that that's the process, but respectfully, I made the motion, the board passed the motion, and I think it is not the most productive approach to second guess that motion and criticize the board for making it when it's done and over. I voted yes tonight, trying my best to give the benefit of the doubt to your hard work. despite what I would maintain has been a very difficult process to follow and understand. And I wish that that yes vote could be appreciated instead of having to face criticism for voicing a minority view of some of the ways that things were handled. So I just want to say my piece about that, because I think we as a group need to be able to allow people to express different opinions. I'm not yelling at anyone. I'm not making any accusations about anyone personally. I'm simply raising questions about things that I think we need as a group to consider.
Pip and Liz.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you feel like people have been unkind to you. I don't see that characterization. It doesn't make sense to me. I feel like, as Lisa said, we've been voicing concerns and questions and hopes for how things might work out so that we could understand things better. Tonight, I agree. I wanted the principals here very badly, but I didn't expect to have a whole presentation given. So that I think took up a lot of their time that they didn't need to sit through because they had read it and we had too. I thought we were going to have more of an opportunity to ask them questions, but it felt like in the end you were wanting to move the question. We were, the vote was on the table, and I have remaining questions that I still through this entire process haven't gotten a chance to ask of the principals or even of you guys. And I too really wish we had focused more on the plan, but the process didn't allow us to. So that was my concern, is that, as Lisa said, we weren't allowed to speak in the committee meetings or the public forums. I think I spoke out in one public forum because it was hard for me to let something go that was said, but we weren't, I was here at the last meeting of the committee and I'm not allowed to do public comments. So there was no opportunity for me to ask my question at that meeting. So this is the only time that we've been allowed to ask questions in this situation where everyone feels like they're rushing it to the next step. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to critique you personally by any means. I'm trying to get my questions answered. And I was doing what I thought was reflecting the view of the public, many of whom were concerned about how rushed the process felt and how they didn't feel like their voices were being heard. I know that changed halfway through the process and I'm really glad it did. But this has nothing to do with either one of you personally. For me, I think it has become a culture of our board overall where we're silencing each other, even when, or particularly where we each have concerns or questions and we're not getting the chance to work through those.
Liz.
Yeah, I guess I share the same sentiment. I appreciate that last ending point of Pip, that like we're silencing each other. I think it's been hard. Like Carrie and I, like we've had the friendship outside of the board, but I feel like I haven't felt like I could call you. I think part of it is because I think we're all very busy. It's, in our lives, but also I think through this process has been very frustrating. I think it's been frustrating for the community too. And I feel concerned that this has brought distrust to the community now distrust the school board, based on, and you're having community members scramble for meetings, scheduling a meeting less than a week before you're going to meet, and then there's a change of the plan, and then so my concern is that you're saying you're talking about the process with the board, but I don't think the board was ever consulted as to what the process was going to be. And when the board was consulted with the process, there wasn't a determination of the board of how to move forward. I think you've had very strong opinion, Carrie, about what you feel is going to be the best interest. And I think it's an educated opinion, right? Like you've had conversations with Byron as well about how to move forward. But, my concern though, is that because I think it's also the way your guys' brains think, like you're looking at maps and data sets and all of this. And so you have a really good idea in your mind, but I think how we project that to the community and present that to the community is two very different things. And so I feel like the board was sort of lost in the process. And again, I will express my ongoing frustration that this wasn't a process to begin with several years ago, so that to get us to this point. So I really value you and the work that you guys did to make us better going forward. And I hope the community can see that. And I hope the community can see that now we've kind of done this tough work. But I voted yes, because I think, I appreciate your guys' work and what the committee is putting forward. you know, and God forbid we need to recall it, I have a yes vote and I could do that. But at the same time, that's not my plan. My concern though is that I share with Pip is that I don't fully understand all the different communities, because my hope today as a final presentation would be more of, you know, why this community or that community or whatnot. Like, I understand you've been through this process, but I do feel like some community members have been left out through this, the way things were scheduled, the timelines, and that there was no clear direction in the beginning, or like come back from the board of what that direction is. So, and I think, you know, people are still probably going to be processing this after the fact. It's a hard decision to make, and I appreciate that we've made the decision tonight, but at the end of the day, I think if we're gonna move forward with a process, I mean, we had the same issues when we were doing the strategic plan. So this isn't new, you know, us having issues with process, and I'm huge on process. You all know that. So I think we need to get better about it. We need to have motions. Maybe we need to have motions on the agenda and have it spelled out a little bit more clear. I think our agendas are getting better. I think we've done a lot to work on our process. We've got rules underway. This board has really done a lot in process, and I am proud of that. So I don't want to beat each other up. And I think, and Nancy, I think you do too. Sometimes you shut people up or don't let people talk when, you know, other people have had a turn. And I think that's the whole thing, is like, we might not agree with what is going on, but I think we all need to be fair to each other.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I have a totally different take. I felt like it was very well thought out and logical. I mean, for me, it's very confusing because I felt like it was laid bare, the reasoning, all the challenges, you know, it's a weird optimization problem, right? Where there's things that are just contrary to each other. And I think you guys really laid out your case. I mean, even at the very beginning, when you guys had that slide deck, I do feel like people didn't read it fully. When I was wondering, like, it's right in the slide deck. Why are people asking questions? So for me, I felt like the process wasn't rushed. I actually felt very comfortable, and maybe it's because I'm more comfortable with data or the way it was logically put together. But I mean, we have had challenges on expectations. I think I think you made that clearly. So on like expectations is maybe that's where the disconnect is. Because for me, it's fine. For you guys, it's not. What do we have to do and like you said, we had issues with the strategic planning too. But maybe it's around that, but I do believe there is mistrust, unfortunately, here because of this. And it's not productive. And I'm hopefully we can make some small adjustments in expectations, and maybe that will help us move forward, because I don't think there's any, you know, bad actors here or anything that was like a hidden agenda.
Well,
You know.
let's be honest though, there was a non-public meeting about me after I said I wasn't appearing about my speaking in public.
But
So
you didn't come
there
to
wa-
you didn't
You were
come to-
invited
I
to, you were
told-
invited to that
Right,
meeting, though.
but my understanding is it was scheduled after I told Nancy I wasn't gonna make it to the meeting that night. So I think, you know, there was no heads up that, hey, we're talking about you, you might want to tune in tonight. Like,
Well, you should have
Well,
come. You should have
I-
come.
I'm talking,
told
I'm
you that I
talking
wasn't
about
gonna be
this
there.
process.
So I think,
so
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
talking about-
there's sometimes I think
really,
there is.
Yeah, I get it. But
Ryan,
that's my point.
if I may, though, I want to just be really clear. I trust people. It's not a question of trust for me. I deal with data for a living. I have a background in epidemiology. I write about medical research for a living. It's not a question of my inability to understand data. My questions around the process were whether we were giving people in our community enough notice.
We were.
And, well, may I please finish? Okay, we had several moments throughout the process where, because of the intense work that was going on behind the scenes by two people who were pretty much working a second job for no pay for a long time, doing an incredible amount of work, they were working very close to these meetings to come up with new iterations of the plan that were not noticed to the community. Often there was one new plan that went out we was sent it out at 5:37 p.m. on a Friday night for a meeting at 3 p.m. on Sunday that added 2 new neighborhoods and those kinds of things. It's
Lisa,
not
we do our best.
I understand that we do our best. And I guess what I'm saying, it's not a question of trust to me, but it's a question of we're talking about changing where people's kids attend school. that from my perspective, that is not a best that is good enough. It's
Okay,
not
thank
about
you.
trust or a lack of understanding the data.
Thank you. Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know if it's my place or not to speak in this conversation.
It's always your place.
But what I just did want to say was, we finished the vote, and after the months of work that you and Byron have done, I think that we're looking at a scope with this that we don't necessarily need to do, because we keep mentioning redistricting the strategic plan. Those are, as you very well know, huge things that we take on, especially redistricting. In no way, shape, or form did you two take this on and say, yeah, it's gonna go smooth. Everyone's gonna love it at the end. And I Byron think might that
Oh,
we're really just, we're over analyzing it to a point where we're like taking credit away from all of our committees. When this has been a process, painstaking and thankless work, that I think we just need to take a step back and just realize how much we've done, and we've bettered the school district for it. So I just wanted to say.
Thank you, Nathan.
You're the
That was
best,
a lovely
Ethan.
summary. That was a great summary. Okay, with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second public comment we have to open.
Oh.
There's 30
Oh,
public
okay,
comment.
we have a second. But Brian just asked if I wanted to say.
Well, because you,
I mean, I think the process was absolutely spectacular. I think our co-chairs, as I mentioned, I think some of our board members are way too critical of the process. You have to remember something. For all intents and purposes, we are volunteers. We get paid $1,500 a year. We all have jobs. We all have families. We are elected officials, so we owe it to our electorate to do the best job we can do. I truly believe that the 9 people sitting here really want to do the best for our students, the best for our staff. And I think when it comes to something as big as redistricting, like Nathan just mentioned, we have to maybe all just take a deep breath and say, let's respect what everybody's doing. Let's trust what everybody's doing. And that's where I think this process kind of fell apart. We weren't trusting each other and we weren't respecting each other. And sure, maybe a meeting didn't get posted exactly when it was supposed to get posted. But you know what? We did the best we could. Maybe I got criticized for the minutes I wrote. I wrote 3 sets of minutes. I worked my butt off writing those minutes, okay? So let's just take a step back, respect each other, work with each other to do the best we can do for our students and the best we can do for our staff. So that's my concluding remarks. What were we gonna do next?
Public comment. Public comment.
Okay, would anybody like to speak? Public comment.
I will. I just want to say, like, I hear all of you and I hear where all of you are coming from. And just being a person that's not involved on a daily, monthly, I just think that if people took things a little less personally and we're just like, okay, we don't agree, right? 2 things can be true, right? Like you can feel like they did the best job and they can be like, you know what? I just felt like certain things could be addressed. And, you know, I think everyone did great. Like I get up here every time, like, thank you, thank you. You've done fabulous. I don't know how you do that cold stuff. It's like mind boggling to me, you know, but still, I know you guys did a great job. And yet I'm still sitting here being like, thank you so much, but sucks my neighborhood's going to be moved, right? Like 2 things can be true. I can sit here and be like, thank you for all your thankless work, but I'm still upset. My neighborhood's being moved. Like there's nothing you can do to change that. So I think like, you know, there are people on this board who do like to speak for people like me, maybe, who are saying like, what about this? What about that? To maybe just try and get things to wiggle a little bit. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because like you said, they are like public people who are coming forward. And, you know, I know that I saw you sitting there and your wife's right behind me. And I'm sure there's been a lot of hours at home and it becomes personal, but like, just understand that we do appreciate the work that you are doing. And I know that it's very difficult, but like, our families are really impacted by this. And like, we kind of have to do everything we can in order to prevent as much as we can from this happening. And I think that there's some people on here that are a little bit more feelers on the board. And I think that's a nice balance to have too. And there's some people that are just like data driven and are like, sounds good to me. You did the work, right? And very trusting of that. And other people tend to not look at it that way, and that's an okay thing. And I think it's very refreshing to have all different types of people on the board because it really brings a great discussion. And I want to thank you because it's been very enjoyable to be part of this whole process. So.
Thank you very much.
Brought Julie along.
Oh.
Those are good.
Thank you.
Lovely.
I'm not even gonna say my name and my address because I think you probably all have it memorized. I do want to reiterate what Julie's saying. Byron, Carrie, this was so much work and I cannot imagine the time spent away from family to accomplish it. And like Julie, like we won't all agree on everything, but I do think like it was the solution, the best possible outcome, probably. I don't know how you could have made everybody happy going through this, but I also want to say to you directly, Nancy, this process in the beginning, it was not great as a community member. Did it course correct? Yes, and thank you so much for hearing us. But I think you need to hear this was not great. And thank you to the members of this board who did listen to the community at the point when we did not feel heard. I think we all felt heard by the end, and I appreciate that course correction. I don't think I'll, feel weird walking by you on the street. But thank you also to those who asked the hard questions at the point when the community did not feel like it had a voice. It's really hard to come to this many meetings and have 3 minutes to condense what you have to say. It's really hard to sit in those redistricting committee meetings and not have a voice as well. And so when you have a community full of people who really, really care, and I did make a lot of very new friends here, but they can't speak. I do think that is the job of the board, right? That's why we elect you, is to be the voice of the community. So I think, like, to Julie's point, all of that can coexist. And anyway, thank you again.
Thank you. Anyone else?
One little thing to
Yeah, just one little thing to add. The other thing from like a community point of view, speaking for me, is that going into this is really hard because if you guys came up with a plan and then came to us and it was black and white, we would be very upset. But then you come with a plan that's not black and white, but then it moves, it has to change so much. So I feel like you guys are in an impossible position because you can't just come, because if you come at the start and said, this is what we've decided, there would have been uproar, even more so. But equally, you came with, this is kind of a framework, and then everyone's upset at that too, because more people are affected. So as much as, echoing what Julie said, like, I am upset, my neighborhood is impacted, which you all know. However, you've given me that choice, and that is just all that I ask for the whole process. Nobody at this point is being forced to do anything. And that could have been very different if you'd said right at the start, this is what happened. And equally, if it had been contracted out, that could have been very different. So I really appreciate that element. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Anyone else? Do we have anyone on Zoom? I would like, oh, no, we don't do Zoom on the second. Okay. Do we have a motion?
We would have gone home a while ago. We could have.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. See you Thursday.
Yeah.